Okay, yeah. So, hi, good evening, everyone. So, welcome to your midterms review. So, like what I mentioned, I created this reviewer with the guidelines or with the mindset na, knock on wood or hypothetically, you're a student na sobrang, alam mo yun, parang very challenging lahat. Like, you find the accruals challenging from the completing the accounting cycle to all the inventory topics, right? And then, I'm going from the mindset na if literally parang kinakapa mo pa lang lahat, like how do you pass by studying within the next 2 days, right? So this is a disclaimer, but super important. That number one, everything might sound very redundant given that it's a refresher or a reviewer. But then kindly take note that I really created this reviewer with the exam in mind. So what does that mean? Na I made sure that if you use this as your major reference alongside all of your quizzes, your exercises, hopefully you'll get enough points in order to pass. So meaning, for example, the exam will be broken down into two parts, right? So you have your theory component and your short problems. I made sure na in today's reviewer, lahat ng theory portion, I'll be able to rediscuss. So the expectation is, if you really listen well now, even though parang paulit-ulit siya, you'll be able to get perfect in theory. So that's 40 points out of a 100-point exam. Then second, I using all of the exercises that people submitted, I analyzed parang what are the common mistakes, what are the common lookouts, and what I can promise you is that if you listen to today's short problems, you won't get as intimidated with the exam questions because I'll be trying to pinpoint ano yung mga common errors natin from the quizzes so that you'll be able to be prepared in the midterms. So with that said, just so that everyone is aligned. So again, last reminder. So November 7, that's gonna be a Monday. And then I understand or I can't imagine rin what everyone's been going through. I hope you and your family safe based on the storm and everything that's been happening. I know that you're busy with a lot of things, but part of the training here in UP is that you have to learn how to prioritize. And for me, I know now we're just one subject out of all the subjects you're taking. But for the next 2 days or the next Sunday and tonight, I hope na your major priority would be to study for your 99.1 midterm. So kasi 30% siya, right? So in terms of the things to bring, make sure to bring your ID and Form 5 just in case. So digital or a physical copy. So as long as you can prove your, you know, na you can prove na you're the actual student taking the exam since, online tayo. Kindly bring your Form 5. Number 2, kindly bring 10 yellow sheets. This would be your sketch paper. So the yellow sheets would be your solutions and also a calculator. So super important that you have your calculator and you use a calculator that you're very accustomed to, right? So with that said, I will now jump into the instructions for the exams. So for the exams, it's gonna be face to face, and then everything's gonna be written. So kindly make sure that you write your full name on the questionnaire, the usual, and then that you only write in black or blue ink. Okay, so black or blue ink. So don't use pencils, or else your answer won't be awarded. Next, all of the things that we'll be checking will be in an answer sheet. So if you can imagine an answer sheet, literally one, number two, number three, and then you write the letter or the answer. So make sure na tama yung pag-match nyo ng letters or theory and also your short probs, right? So another thing, when you cross out again, sa quizzes, sa exercises, I was a bit more lenient. Pero for the midterms, please make sure na all of your cross out, particularly with your answers, you write your initials, right? Next, in terms of breaks, so 3 hours yung exam, only one person at a time can leave the examination room. So basically, you have to leave your exam paper if you have to go to the bathroom and whatnot. And then, given a face-to-face siya, let's turn off or silent mode all of our mobile phones, right? And then lastly, in terms of submission, kindly make sure na all of your questionnaires, your answer sheets, and your scratch papers will be submitted. So in terms of the exams, again, like what I mentioned, it's 100 points. 40 points theory, meaning 40 items. 1 theory question, 1 point. And then 30 short problems. Okay, so one of our things that we're avoiding is, as much as possible, dinamihan namin yung short problems so that you will have more chances of, getting a higher score, right? So definitely, merong iba chained, like for example, you can expect mga 2 to 3 short problems na connected if it's a really big chunk of the lesson. But the idea here is that you'll have 30 items of your short problems, 2 points each. So again, the reason why I'm gonna be taking a long time for this reviewer is that if you think about it, as long as you get perfect in your theory and then you get half of your short probs, you'll roughly be able to pass at the very least, right? So I think that your mindset going into the exam should be, pag theory, dapat perfect na natin siya. And then number 2, dapat it only takes 40 minutes max of the 3 hours. So be wise, pag hindi nyo alam yung theory, you mark it, you put your best answer on like your scratch paper, and then balikan nyo na. For me, ang mas worth na points would be short probs. So short probs, be smart again. Kapag hindi nyo talaga alam, be honest with yourself, skip it. Answer first the things that you can answer. So rack up your points so that you won't be intimidated by the time pressure, right? So with that said, the question here is, let's adopt like the worst case scenario, right? The worst case is student A, I'm not talking about any student in particular, pero I created the midterms in the mindset na, for example, everything was so busy, you weren't able to review, right? What can you do now in the next 24 hours in order to make sure na you have your best fighting chance, right? So my number one priority is to go over this midterm reviewer, right? Make sure na everything I mentioned, you really take into heart. Because again, lahat ng theory papasadahan ko in some way or some form. So meaning, lahat ng lalabas sa theory in the exam, we've already discussed twice, right? So hopefully mabilis yung pick up nyo in terms of this. Number 2, master all quizzes. Primarily, quiz number 3, quiz number 4, quiz number 5. I'm not saying na same items yung lalabas, but the amount of analysis, the complexity, the difficulty will be the same. So make sure na kung nagkaroon na kayo ng mistakes in quiz 3, quiz 4, quiz 5, let's make sure na hindi na siya mauulit in the midterms, right? And then finally, after you've done your quizzes, after you've done your midterms, if there are 2 chapters na I hoping na you really master, it would be chapter 6 and chapter 3. Why chapter 6? Chapter 6 will show a lot in the short problems. So meaning, don't take for granted gross profit method, retail inventory method, errors lalo na, inventory errors, super important. Cost flows is so easy in the sense that it's very procedural. Make sure na you know cost flows, right? And LCNRV. LCNRV, as long as you know the theory, as long as you put it into heart, you'll be able to really get it. So again, gross profit, retail inventory method, errors, super important yung errors sa inventory. Make sure you really master it. Cost flow, super important. Make sure you master it. And then LCNRV. Now, if you really master chapter 6 with a lot of exercises, kahit ano pa yung lumabas, I hope na you'll be able to answer to the best of your abilities. So, I'm not promising anything, pero tomorrow, I'll try to include more exercises on chapter 6. Tonight, what I'll be focusing on would be theory for everything sa exams, re-answering our quiz for chapter 6, and also some problems on chapters 1 to 4, right? So, ang expectation is that after this first part of the midterm reviewer, dapat ma-perfect nyo na yung theory. Number 2, in terms of short problems, for chapters 1 to 4, as long as you take into heart what we'll be discussing today, hindi na kayo medyo magugulat on ano yung lalabas. So, and then, we'll rediscuss the quiz. tomorrow, I'll try to upload like a reviewer part 2 focusing on inventory. Ganun siya ka-important, right? So I'll try to discuss more exercises if I have enough time. Pero if not, please revisit all of the exercises, all of the quizzes for chapters 5, chapter 6, right? So before I delve into the parang review proper, are there any questions before I begin regarding the quiz or whatnot? If not, kindly thumbs up in the chat. Right?
Sir?
Okay. Yeah, Jor. Yeah.
Question po, pwede daw po ba gumamit ng cycle?
So in terms of calculator, I think yung binabawal lang would be programming calculator. So meaning, alam niyo yung parang pwede yung, kasi merong programming calculators na you can encode your like stuff or kodigo in the programming. Pero yung cycle, I think pwede. I'll just double check with the department. Pero I think cycle and palengke calculator, meaning yung literal any calculator you can use, right? Thank you so much for that question, Jor.
Thank you po.
So my suggestion is if yung typical cycle na ginagamit for math, then you can bring it. But then just in case, if you have extra calculators at home, dalhin nyo na rin. Just so that if ever meron kayong classmate na nagdala ng programming calculator, we can just lend to them. Yun. Are there any other questions? If none, kindly thumbs up in the chat so I can proceed. Okay. So with that said, what time yung exam? 9 to 12, right? 9 a.m. to 12 noon, right? Okay. So with that said, we'll jump into chapter 1. So what I'll be doing is, we'll review chapter 1, pero not everything. Super selected. And then, every after chapter, I'll ask if anyone has any questions. Ideally, kung it's more about theory and solving, I wanted to thank people that submitted exercises they wanted to answer in class. I think realistically, given the time that we have tonight, I'll be able to include it in part 2 for tomorrow. Yeah, so we'll include all of those in part 2. I'll try to upload part 2 early morning tomorrow so that people can see that. Okay. So with that said, let's take like a refresher of 99.1, right? So 99.1 is basically accounting 101. In chapter 1, really talks about conceptual framework. So in terms of conceptual framework, basically, alam niyo naman yung definition ng accounting. Pero again, super important to note that one of the most common misconceptions is that people think that bookkeeping is the same as accounting. That's incorrect, right? Because we know that accounting actually has 3 parts, wherein they identify, they record, and communicate. Meaning that bookkeeping is just one part of the accounting process, right? Wherein it's the recording process. Step 2 lang si bookkeeping. So again, in terms of accounting, bookkeeping and accounting is not the same. Okay? Bookkeeping is just a part of accounting under the recording phase, right? And in terms of this, because primarily our main goal in accounting is to communicate data, accounting is only as useful as the information it presents, right? So for chapter 1, super important that you are mastered already the 2 fundamental qualitative characteristics, the fundamental, which is relevant and reliable, or RR, and our 4 enhancing qualitative characteristics, or VCUT, right? So for this, make sure na you know the 2 fundamentals and the 4 enhancing, right? And also the definition, right? So meaning, if I ask you, what is the fundamental characteristic that helps us in terms of making a difference in decisions? Primarily giving predictive value and confirmatory value. Then you'll be able to answer na, it's relevant. So anything that has to do with materiality is in relation to relevance. On the other hand, the second fundamental is reliability, or how can you make sure na you trust this information. So the kind of characteristic that you need to ensure that it's complete, neutral, or free of error, or in essence, it's faithfully represented, is talking about reliability, right? So in terms of fundamental and enhancing, ang super important dito is you can also define or at least identify ano yung mga keywords that talk about each of the characteristics. So pag materiality, relevant. Kapag faithful representation, reliability, right? Same with enhancing. So again, enhancing is VCAT. So verifiable. So what does verifiable mean? That ang keyword dito is that different observers can reach a consensus, right? So even though they have different knowledge or independent silang observers, the keyword for verifiability is that they can reach a consensus. Number 2, in terms of comparability or comparable, it talks about consistency, right? So that you can identify and understand the similarities and differences. Understandability, ang importante dito is that you present the information clearly and concisely, and then the point of view that you're so 'di ba understandable, meaning if I ask a 9-year-old kid if they understand the financial statement, of course their answer would be no. So ang point of view natin in terms of how understandable it is that it's understandable to those who have reasonable knowledge about business and economics, right? So understandability, ang i-connect natin doon is from the point of view of those who have reasonable knowledge. And then timely is that it's just in time in order to influence decisions, right? So and then from there, so now that we know what accounting is, what are the characteristics, the 2 fundamental, the 4 enhancing, the next would be users and activities. So again, there are 2 uses, internal and external, right? So again, internal is managerial accounting, wherein it's for managers to plan and organize and run their business. So it's all about internal reporting, right? So what are examples of internal users? Anyone who is in the company. So what are those? Company officers, internal user. Marketing managers, internal users. Production supervisors, internal users, right? In contrast, you have your external users, right? So yung external users, basically outside of the entity. So what are your external users? Investors, so that they can buy, hold, or sell ownership. Your creditors are external, government agencies, customers, and labor unions. So again, master who are your internal and external users, right? For me, it's easier to just analyze it. Are they part of the company? Or are they outside of the entity, right? So pag internal siya, it's managerial accounting, and then external, it's financial accounting, right? So again, make sure that you know your internal and your external users. Then from there, yun na yung medyo theory part of chapter 1. Now we can move on to the accounting equation. So syempre, I know by this point, sawang-sawa na kayo, but then super important fundamental is that assets should be equal to your liabilities and your equity. That is the fundamental equation of accounting, right? So again, assets is equal to liabilities plus equity. Now, we know now when you create a journal entry, every journal entry should maintain a balance, right? So even if hindi nyo alam yung second part of the journal entry, the idea here is that you know that it maintains a balance. So if I told you that a certain journal entry increases the asset, what are the possible different scenarios in order to maintain the balance, right? So one scenario is that if an asset increases, in order to maintain the balance, another asset will have to decrease. So that's scenario 1. Scenario 1, asset increases, another asset decreases. So tumaas si left side, pero bababa rin si left side in the same way so that you maintain the balance of your accounting equation. Scenario number 2, if an asset increases, pwede rin that a liability increases, right? So kung tumaas si asset, tataas rin si liability to maintain the balance. An example of this would be umutang ka, right? So pag umutang ka, that's debit cash, credit accounts payable. Tumaas si assets, tumaas si liability, right? And then the third scenario would be your asset increases, so your equity increases also, right? So tumaas si left side, so tataas rin si right side. Now, equity is the tricky part. Meaning, if an asset increases, then the corresponding event could be a revenue increase or an expense decrease, right? So you have to further break down equity increase. So how do you know, ay parang what would it entail for equity to increase? Either tumaas yung revenue mo or bumaba yung expenses, right? So make sure na you know that there is a balance that needs to be maintained every journal entry, right? So for example, if I ask you now, an asset decreased, right? So in order to maintain the balance, what are the possible scenarios, right? So pag bumaba si asset, one scenario would be baliktad. So another asset would increase or a liability would decrease or equity decreases. Are there any questions here for this concept? Super important that you understand this concept because not only will it help you parang frame your journal entries, pero it's also to guide you in terms of your financial statements, right? So moving on, what if a liability naman decreases, right? So if a liability decreases, in order to maintain balance, what are the three things that could happen? Scenario one, if your liability decreased on the right side, then on the left side, kailangan rin bumaba the same way si asset, right? To maintain balance. Another thing that could happen would be you have liability one that will decrease and then you have another liability that would increase, right? And then the last scenario would be if a liability decreased, then your equity will have to increase the same way. So again, how does equity increase? Either a revenue increases or an expense decreases, right? So baliktad pag kwari, how do we decrease equity? If a revenue decreases or an expense increases, right? So I hope intuitive, the tables make it intuitive na there's a balance, right? So nagkakaroon ng balance. The total increases will be equal to your total decreases, right? So that basically highlights what we need to figure out in terms of the journal entries. Now, the reason why I wanted to focus on breaking down equity is because we know that from this simple equation, equity can be further divided into four, right? Into four. Owner's capital, which would pertain to your additional investments, revenues, expenses, and owner's drawings, meaning owner's drawings, medyo matagal na natin hindi nakikita to, pero again, reminder to everyone, owner's drawings is when your owners take money away from the entity and then they spend it on personal use. So be careful na pare, pag kinuha na yung pera, that's owner's drawings. Like for example, I'm an owner of a bakery. I took away 10,000 pesos. Fast forward 2 weeks. I spent 10,000 on shoes. That 10,000 is not an expense anymore because that is separate from the entity. That's my personal expense, right? So wala siyang effect kay economic entity. So kindly remember owner's drawings and then yung implications na. Now once tinanggal na yung pera, whatever the owner uses on the money, it won't affect the entity. So it won't reflect in your financial statements, right? So now, basically, you just have to master the equation. So a good example to revisit here is your 1.5 exercise. So again, this is your first exercise na I want you to take a look back on. So ang importante dito, was that it gave you 2 periods. January 1, 2020 to symbolize your beginning balances. Your December 31 to symbolize your ending balances. And then you have your changes in your equity, which is affected by the 4 components, which is your additional investment, your drawings, your total revenues, and your total expenses. So please revisit 1.5. I will just discuss one company, which is Alpha Company. I'll expect na, for the interest of time, you'll be able to revisit 1.5. So how do you solve Alpha Company, right? So pag binigyan kayo ng ganito, in terms of mga short probs or whatever, automatic, if binigay sa inyo si asset, si liability, always solve or complete the equation already. So meaning, assets is equal to 80,000, your liabilities is 90,000. So, you know that your equity is, wait, sorry, 110. Sorry, I think mali si liabilities now. Apologies. Okay, sorry. Yeah. So again, for Alpha Company, ang binigay sa atin is assets is equal to 80,000, liabilities is 41,000. So again, kapag binigay sa inyo already yung 2 of the components, then all you have to do is to solve for your equity, which is 80 minus 41 to get 39,000 in equity at the start of the year, right? And then, here, ang kulang naman is the assets. So, since we know that liabilities plus equity is equal to assets, we know that it's 110. Right? So now, the question is, if your beginning owner's equity is 39,000 and your ending owner's equity is 50,000, what was the change? Meaning that in the year from January 2020 to December 31, your equity increased by 11,000, right? So how do you get again 11,000? Basically, 50 minus 39, right? Now, you know that this 11,000 is comprised of different components. You have a missing additional investment. Meron kang owner's drawing na subtract. You have a revenue na add na 350. And then you have a negative expense, right? So how do you solve for the missing owner's capital? So basically, all you have to do is know your signs. Owner's drawing is negative. So that's negative 15. So you have negative 15,000 to represent your owner's drawings. Add your revenue, which increases your equity. So on 350,000. And then you subtract your expenses, 330. So right now, if you sum your owner's drawings, revenues, and your expenses, it's currently at 5,000, right? And then you just get the difference of your owner's capital to 9,000, right? So in terms of this, another way to solve for this, which is also apparent in your quiz 1.6, another thing that you need to review is your 1.6 sa quiz. So is the STAR laboratories. So it's basically the same. I just showed the first one for those that are more visual. So now I will show another way to solve for this. And this is the more important way of solving for this in terms of steps, right? The step by step. So for this, basically what was given was, again, may beginning ka, may ending ka. For the exam or for the midterms, be careful. Which one of these is your beginning? Which one of this would be your ending? Right now, ang inuna is si beginning. Si 2020. Pero be careful na baka sa exam, iba yung table. Inuuna si 2021 or si second year. So again, have a clear mind to double check the dates. We know now that the beginning total assets is 560. The ending of your total assets is 630. The beginning total liabilities 195 and the ending of 290. Now, may binigay na changes within the year, right? Which is the additional investment of 50,000. So now the question is, how do you determine the net income or net loss for the year ending December 31? So for number 6, you can solve it in terms of like the table na we showed. Pero my preferred solution for this is this, the 3 steps on how to solve this. So automatic, if parang yung ask lang sa inyo in the short prob is like find the missing net income, net loss, owner's drawings, etc., etc. The first thing is determine what the requirement is. So step 1, ang pinapahanap sa atin is si net income or si net loss, right? Step 2 is find your missing equity. Like what I've mentioned, these are 2 of the major components. You already have your assets, you already have your liabilities. So your second step should be complete the accounting equation. So if my total assets for beginning year 2021 is 560, my total liabilities is 195,000. My total equity therefore would be 560 minus 195. So you have 365,000 in total equity. For ending period, you have 630 total assets, so total assets, and 290 total liabilities, My total equity is what? 340 because it's 630 minus 290 equals 340,000. Now, the last step is that you do an informal changes in equity. So we know that in one of our financial statements, you have your income statement, your balance sheet, and then you also have your changes in owner's equity. When you're solving and hindi naman kayo pinapagawa ng financial statement, please use the informal changes in equity, which would be comprised of what? Your beginning balance, your additions, which would be, ano ba yung mga nag-i-increase na equity natin? Your investments or any net income. So add investments, add net income. Less, pag net loss, it's a subtraction. And then less drawings so that you'll arrive with your ending balance. Now, let's plug in the given. Now we know, since we did this table, that our beginning balance is 365,000 for equity and our ending balance is 340,000. Aside from this, sinabi sa problem that there's an additional investment of 50,000, right? So now ang missing is net income ba or net loss and may drawings ba? So let's double check the given. Walang binigay na drawings. So pag walang binigay in the table, then treat it as 0. So now, isa na lang yung missing natin. Either net income or net loss. So you just solve for x. How do you solve for x? So you have 365. Sorry, naghahang ata yung calculator. Oops. There. 365 plus the 50 na additional investment. Right now, the subtotal is 415. So the subtotal is 415. Now, you know that your ending balance is 340,000. So what do you need to add or subtract from 415 in order to get 340,000, right? Or in essence, you can just 415 minus 340, you get 75,000. So now, your 415 needs to be subtracted by 75,000 to get 340,000. Since it's a subtraction, then it's a net loss of 75,000. So after you solve for x, if you do the formula properly, 360 plus 50 minus 75 is equal to 340. Okay? So again, kapag may nakita kayong short prop tapos binigay na si total assets and si total liabilities, kumpletuhin nyo na muna kagad si equity and then do your informal changes in equity. Right? So, someone in class submitted this really good exercise. So, for this exercise, basically, ang nangyari is you should know how to solve across different years, right? So, in chapter 1, we expect that you're already mastered at the relationships. So, there's this really good exercise that was submitted that really highlighted this format. So basically, in terms of the given, it was looking for what is the owner's equity raw of 2013, what is the owner's equity of 2015, if you know the following. Number 1, you know the owner's equity of 2014 at the year end is 10,000. So owner's equity at the year end is 10,000. You know also that in year 2015, you have additional investment of 5,000. You have a net loss of negative 8,000 in 2015. And then binigay sa inyo yung revenues and expenses for 2014. The reason why I love this problem is because it shows you that all you need to do kapag tinatanong si owner's equity is that you need your informal owner's equity. Now, we're already familiar with this format na you add your investments, you add your net income or subtract your net loss in year 2015, right? Pero yung ito, you notice, ang difference lang nila, ito, add revenue less expenses. Directionally, they're the same. Pero the reason why ito add revenue less expenses is because in 2014, ang binigay is revenue and expenses, right? In 2015, ang binigay is net loss. So, ito yung susundan natin. Again, it's the same, right? Revenue minus expense will be your net income or net loss. So revenues will always increase your equity. That's why you add revenue. Expenses always decrease your equity. That's why you subtract your expenses. Same with your net income. A net income will always increase your equity. That's why you add net income and you subtract net loss. So, ganun yung fundamental approach for this. So, since tatlo yung years, owner's equity 2013, owner's equity 2014, and owner's equity 2015, I'll make two tables. One during the year of 2014 and one during the year of 2015. Why? Because we know that the ending balance is 10,000 in year 2014. Again, one of the crucial things to note in accounting is kung ano yung ending balance mo for year 1, yun yung beginning balance mo in year 2, right? So in year 2014, you have owners of 10,000 year end. So yung beginning mo ng 2015 is 10,000. Next, we just plug in the given. So may 5,000 na investment in 2015. So that's an addition. And then there's a net loss in 2015. So, negative 8,000. May binigay bang drawings? Wala. So, since walang binigay, we assume that's 0. And therefore, we can finally solve for the first given, which is what is the owner's equity for 2015? So, again, it's 10, the beginning balance, plus your additions, your investments, and then less your net loss of 8,000. So now, you know that your ending balance or your owner's equity at 2015 is 7,000. So we're done with the first requirement. Then, to get the owner's equity for 2013, basically we just have to get the beginning balance of 2014, right? Because January 1, 2014 owner's equity is equal to your December 31, 2013 owner's equity. So what are the other two given na hindi pa natin nalalagay? The revenues and the expenses. So we know that beginning balance plus 7,500 minus 2,500 should equal to 10,000. So to make matters easier, pag we know we should solve for the net income, which is 7,500 minus 2,500 is 5,000. So X plus 5,000 is equal to 10,000. And therefore, our beginning inventory is 5,000. Right? So let's double check. 5,000 beginning inventory, 5,000 plus 7,500 minus 2,500 is equal to 10,000. So my answer here is owner's equity of 5,000, right? So again, if it's an owner's equity tapos yun yung mga missing, your greatest framework to use is the informal changes in owner's equity, wherein you have your beginning balance and then your additions, your less or your subtractions to get your ending balance. So take note na it varies for your given. Kapag revenues and expenses, ito yung format. If net income naman yung binigay, ito yung format, right? But I hope na intuitively you understand the difference. So as you can see, by getting the balance lang of 10,000, you'll be able to solve na for the ending balance of the next year and also the beginning balance of 2014. Now, my caveat here is that madali lang to in terms of solving. The reason why I appreciated this exercise was that it provided you more insights on how to deal with all of the information. Sa midterms, it won't be as straightforward. Merong reading comprehension part. So again, please make sure to take note of the dates. Going back to the directions, we're not gonna be entertaining questions. So double check the dates, try to plot your timeline so that alam nyo, itong 2013 or 2022, is this year 1, year 2, year 3, right? And then know kung beginning balance pa siya, ending balance, etc. etc. But in essence, ang panghahawakan nyo na framework would be this informal changes in owner's equity. So as long as you master this, and as long as you read the problems carefully, double reading the dates, you'll be able to solve these types of short problems under chapter 1, right? So actually that's it for that learning objective. Are there any questions regarding the 3 exercises na I highlighted? So again, ang importante is yung quiz 1.6. So make sure na you understand how I was able to solve for this. And importante rin tong addendum exercise. Know how to solve across years given different dates, right? Are there any questions before I proceed dun sa last theory part for chapter 1? If none, kindly thumbs up. I'll wait mga 10 to 15 seconds. Kindly thumbs up if everything's okay. Right. Okay. Thank you. Okay. So now we go with preparing financial statements. In terms of theory for FS, you know that there are 5, right? Where our main focus would be 3. Our income statement, balance sheet, and changes in equity. Cash flows will be discussed in 99.2. And yung notes are just supplemental information used to explain. So by now, I hope na you know all of the names, right? So these are the simple names, pero there are long names like statement of comprehensive income, profit and loss statement, statement of financial position, statement of changes in equity. So make sure na you're super good at determining kung anong statement ba we're pertaining to, right? So now, in essence, all of these 5 financial statements share the story of a company's financial position and performance. So, again, in terms of format, I hope na you remember week 1 and week 2. Income statement talks about the financial performance, right? So, since it's a performance, it talks about the story of its transactions. So, meaning, at the header, make sure na alam niyo yung headers ng lahat ng financial statements. It's for the period ending. Meaning, for income statements, it shows your revenue, your expenses, your net income and net loss for a period. A period. So for a duration of time. For the period ended. For the period ending income statement. The financial position refers to your balance sheet. And therefore, pag balance sheet, it is a snapshot of a company's financial state. Meaning, ano ba yung assets, ano ba yung liabilities, ano ba yung equity ko at a specific date. So, ang sa header, ang nakalagay, as of. So, please make sure na you know. Ito yung mga easy formatting, easy headline, easy theory. Income statement is a period. So, for the period ending. On the other hand, balance sheet talks about a snapshot. So financial position. As the name suggests, position, one point in time. So as of or at a specific date, right? So that ends chapter 1. Are there any questions before we proceed to chapter 2? Particularly with the exercises na I mentioned. Okay. So wala. So if none, we can proceed to chapter 2. Okay, so now we know the fundamentals. We know the accounting equation. We know the financial statements. The next step is, how do you actually record, right? And in terms of recording, we're starting to introduce our journal entries. And under our journal entries, may is super important concept na debits and credits. And by now, I hope na you know that debits and credits just means left and right. Right? And under the accounts, the very first thing that we have to be clear on is that an account is your building block, wherein an account shows you the individual accounting record of the increases and decreases in a specific asset, liability, or equity at a given point in time. So these are some of your assets, some of your liabilities, and some of your equity. And per asset, per liability, per equity, you have an account. And in order to track the changes in that account, we actually have what you call your T accounts, right? And one of the things that I want to highlight in this class is that for you to be able to have an easy time in terms of solving short problems, always look at what's being asked. Kapag mga ending balance or beginning balance of a particular account yung hinihingi sa inyo, automatically create a T account. Right? So, what are the important components of your T account? Know what the normal balances are so that you can have a beginning balance and an ending balance. And then whatever happens during the period will reflect either as debits or credits. Now, I hope by all of the exercises that we've done through the class, you have a clear understanding on what are the things that could increase or decrease a certain account. So for example, kay cash. Cash is an asset. We know that the normal account of cash or an asset would be a debit, right? And therefore, anything that will increase cash will be a debit. Anything that will decrease cash will be a credit. So what are the things that can debit your cash account? Number 1, nag-collect ka ng AR. So again, merong accounts receivable from someone, meaning they owe you money. So if you collect that particular amount, then your journal entry would be debit cash, credit AR, right? So collecting money will always increase your cash and therefore it will be a debit. Owner's capital investment, nag-infuse ka ng cash, tumaas si cash, so debit cash, credit owner's capital, right? 400. If you sold inventory, make sure na, again, sa inventory, you can sell it either through accounts receivable or through cash. So for those inventory na you sold in cash, you sold something in exchange for money. And therefore, debit siya of cash. If you obtain a bank loan, meaning I go to BPI, I go to BDO, and then I look for a short-term note payable, ang mangyayari is debit cash, credit, note payable, or credit accounts payable, right? So all of those things, generally, or even context clues or reading comprehension, you know that it increases cash. So those are debit accounts. What are credit accounts? Kapag nag-owner's drawings ka, meaning you got money out of the company or you paid off the debt na you had to, then that will be, or if you purchase something, that will lower your cash, right? So in essence, you start with your beginning balance, you subtotal the debit, so 1,000 plus all of these additions will be 4,400, and then you have 600 in credit. So 4,400, after you subtotal your debits and your credits, 4,400 minus 600 will give you your ending balance of 3,800. So the expectation for everyone is that given a T account, and then I'll tell you a transaction, you should have a clear idea on how it will affect that particular T account. So if I told you, how will collecting AR affect my cash, then that's a debit in cash. And then you know that there's a corresponding credit in AR. So per T account, make sure that you're really good at it. I will show you an exercise that was again submitted by someone that was closely tied to one of our exercises. Pero later na. But again, super important, if they're asking you for balances, always go to your T accounts. And then you try to analyze, number one, what are the things affecting my T accounts? And then balance ba yung T accounts ko? Meaning, is my beginning balance gonna parang have a clear cut kay ending balance? So now, let's say, hindi pala, parang you're missing an amount. Like, kuwari, wala si 2,000, right? Wala si 2,000. Pag wala si 2,000, then your subtotal debit is 2,400. And therefore, parang weird na your ending balance is 3,800, right? So, pag nagkakaroon ng ganun, your knee reaction would be, there's something missing. So now you have to work backwards. I know all of the things that affect cash. Kung may missing debit, what could it be? And then you saw sa given, mayroon palang sale in inventory. That's probably a sale in inventory in cash. So, again, be good at understanding how transactions affect your T accounts, right? A lot of the short problems will ask you, what are the ending balance of this? What are the ending balance of that? Make sure na you start with your T accounts so that you parang make sure na you know how to solve for the balance. And then make sure na everything's balanced. So again, make sure you understand the relationship of your T accounts. One good practice for this is the poster company, which was one of our quizzes, right? So for this is they were asking us in quiz number 4 to solve for the cost of goods sold. So number 1, step 1, what is being asked? It's asking us for the balance of your cost of goods sold. Tapos binigyan tayo ng inventory and accounts payable. So step 1, pag ganito, is what? You make your T accounts for your AP, you make your T accounts for your inventory. Number 2, you plug in the given. Again, be careful with the dates. In the poster company, ang unang binigay is 2015 versus 2014. So this 2,600 is an ending balance of your inventory, which is a normal debit, right? Yung 2,900 of 2014 is the beginning balance, right? So 2,900. And then ano pa yung given? There's an ending accounts payable of 750 since it's a liability, credit yung balance. And a beginning balance of 500, right? What are the things that were given? The company paid its suppliers 4,900, right? So, meron kang 4,900 na debit, right? So, probably you paid it in cash. So, hindi niya ma-affect si inventory. So now, in terms of the accounts payable and the inventory, merong mga butas. It doesn't balance. Like if you add 500 plus 490, pag pinagbangga mo sila, it will have a debit balance of 4,400. Now, the question is, how did it become 750 as an ending balance if it has a debit of 4,400? Meaning, there's a missing credit. And one of the more normal credit for accounts would be purchases, right? When you purchase inventory, it's debit inventory, credit, accounts payable. So there's a missing purchase that will affect both your accounts payable and your inventory. Aside from this, there's a missing COGS. And we know that in terms of journal entry, ano ba yung normal journal entry for cost of goods sold? Debit COGS, credit inventory. So under the inventory account, there's a purchase account missing and a cost of goods sold. Since ito, sa accounts payable, isa lang yung missing, we solve accounts payable first, right? So, step 2, we solve for the first missing. May missing na purchases. So, for the purchases, so kung ang current is, we have 4,400 na debit, and we want to make it credit of 750, then we need a super huge credit. So we add the two together. So it needs a credit of 5.15 million, right? In purchases. Now that we know what A is, we know that there's a debit purchase pala in inventory at 5.15. This will help us get a new subtotal of 8.05 million. Now, the next question is, there is a missing amount. From 850, kailangan maging 26 siya. And therefore, if you subtract 850 and 26, you have 5,450, which is your missing cost of goods sold. So, you will be able to get your cost of goods sold. So again, as you can see, ganito yung mga types of questions na you can expect sa short prompts, right? Na, number 1, the very first thing you do, you look at the given. May missing raw na COGS. Next, you look at ano ba yung mga binigay sa yung information. So, binigay sa akin yung accounts payable, so I'll make a T account. I'll make a T account of inventory, and then I'll plug in the given. And also, always be careful of the dates. 2014, beginning balance. 2015, ending balance. Aside from that, what are the effects of the transactions, right? So, 49. And then, let's analyze now what's missing. Again, ang missing is purchases and COGS. So, first solve for purchases and then get COGS, right? So, basically, kailangan ganun kagaling yung analysis nyo. So, make sure na you know the relationships on what are the things that will affect both your cash and AP. What are the things that will affect both your cash and AR. So, later I'll show you another T account example so that you'll be prepared for other short problems similar to those, right? So, again, in chapter 2, debits should equal your credits. Your left should equal to your right, right? And we had this expanded accounting equation, debit-credit version, wherein nilipat lang natin for everything to have positive balances, right? Na minus expense, minus owner's drawing, so nilipat natin sa kabila. And therefore, we know that those on the left side have a normal balance of debits, and those on the right side have a normal balance of credit. So now, baka tanong sa atin is, what does it mean for an account to have a normal balance? It's a normal balance when an account increases on that side. For example, cash has a normal balance of a debit. Therefore, if I increase my cash, then that's gonna be a debit. So, ang normal balance ni cash would be debit. For example, another example, accounts payable. My accounts payable, for it to increase, I need a credit. And therefore, my normal balance is a credit. So again, the definition ng normal balance is it's the side where an account increases. So for expenses, the normal account would be debit. So meaning, debit expense means an increase in expense, right? Credit in expense would mean a decrease in expense. So make sure na number 1, you know the normal balances of your all of your 6 accounting components, and that 2, you know that the normal balance is the balance wherein an account increases. So again, if it's inventory, the normal balance of inventory is debit. Therefore, inventory increases when there's a debit, right? So normal balance when an account increases. Now that we're clear with that, the next step is let's create journal entries. By now, I hope you're masters na kayo ng journal entries. Now, ang super important concept under journal entry is that journal entries follow what we call double entry accounting system. Again, super important, double entry accounting system. So make sure na you know this. Kaya I highlighted in yellow. So everything that you see highlighted in yellow, make sure na you know by heart, right? So double entry accounting means that for each transaction or for each journal entry, the total credits should equal total debits, meaning the value per journal entry, not the number. What do I mean by this? Doon sa quiz natin regarding chapter 2, merong mga nadali na they thought double entry means kapag isa yung debit mo, then dapat isa yung credit mo. That's wrong. What is important for double entry is that it's not the number of debits or not the number of credits that should be the same. Or that, double entry means that it has to affect both sides of the accounting equation, meaning it has to affect one asset and then one liability or equity. In the simplest terms, double entry accounting means that for each transaction or for each journal entry, your total credit should equal your total debits. Meaning, ang total debits ko here is 50, total credits ko here is 50. Double entry accounting. Simple journal entry lang siya, meaning one debit, one credit. Pero, it can also have compound journal entry. Kapag compound, there is more than one either credit or debit. So in this case, there are two debits, cash 100, debit cash, debit AR 200, so credit revenue 300. So dalawa yung debit, isa yung credit, but it still follows the double entry accounting system because your debits of 100 plus 200 is equal to your 300, right? So balance it. Every journal entry dapat balance it. Another wrong thing is that you think that it should impact both sides of the accounting equation. That's wrong also. For example, in this simple journal entry, it only affects what? Your equity and your liability. And your equity and your liability affects one side lang of the equation, the right side, right? So, hindi rin yun tama. Basically, double entry accounting just means that the total of your credits, 50 or 300, should equal your total of your credits of 300, right? Yun. So, I hope na super clear sa inyo what double entry accounting is. Super crucial to sa exam. Next, we're done with journal entries. The next step is for ledger accounts, right? So we're done with journal entries. The next step is your ledger. And again, just a refresher. Your ledger has this following definition. But in essence, and if there's one thing that you have to remember about ledger, it's the one highlighted in yellow. That it's the ledger, not anything else, that provides the balance of each account and keeps track of the changes in the balances. Again, the ledger, not anything else. It's the ledger that provides the balance of each account and keeps track of the changes in these balances, right? So in a sense, the journal entry is basically your formal entry of a transaction to a journal. So again, yung journal entry mo is basically a reflection of each and every transaction, and it follows your double entry accounting system. On the other hand, your account ledger is the formal version of your T account. So we know this is our T account, and this is what a ledger looks like. But in essence, it's just the formal version of a T account. So again, your ledger and not anything else is the one that provides the balance of each account and keeps track of the changes in these balances, right? So finally, the last thing that we need to master is that, okay, we know journal entries, we know ledgers, we know how to post to ledgers, we know financial statements. The last is trial balance, right? And again, a trial balance is a list of accounts and balances at a specific point of time. So at a specific point in time, right? However, again, echoing back one of the more common errors in our quizzes, it doesn't mean that your debits should equal to your credits, that all accounts reflect correcting balance. So, wag kayo magkampante that your trial balance balanced, meaning that your debits is equal to your credits, because there are some errors that are not reflected. Or parang even though you make those errors, it will still give you debits is equal to credits. So in essence, directionally, we want our debits and credits to balance. But again, it does not mean that your debits equaling to your credits, that all accounts reflect correct balances. So itong 30,200 is equal to 30,200 na debits and credits. That's a good thing. But that does not mean that tama yung balance natin sa cash, kasi sometimes pwede ka nagkamali, right? Na may kamali ka sa debit, may pagkakamali ka sa credit, pero nag-offset sila, right? So what are the specific limitations or errors? So for example, if you completely omit a transaction, it won't affect your debit or credit, so it will still balance. Next, an incorrect entry was posted. So as long as tama yung debit or credit balance mo, it will still balance, but it doesn't mean there are no errors. Another thing, it got posted twice. So for example, you have supplies of 900, and then basically you paid for your supplies based on like an accounts payable or whatnot, right? Pwede mo namang na-double yung supplies, na parang the real account of supplies is 450 and the accounts payable is right? So basically it does not mean na nag-balance sila, na there are no errors, because again, a transaction can be completely omitted, an incorrect entry was posted, pwedeng naulit lang yung journal entry mo, so it will still balance. There are incorrect accounts or there are offsetting errors, na there is a transposition error na instead of 8.24, nalagay mong 8.42 both sides. So it will still balance pero hindi tama or may errors pa rin. Or there's a sliding error na parang 8.24 nagawang 82.4. Or there's a data entry error na 100 or 10. Meaning, if you make all of these errors, there's a possibility na magbabalance pa rin yung trial balance mo. And therefore, you have to make sure na gets nyo to. That the rule of trial balance is that you want to make sure na your debits is equal to your credits. But that does not guarantee that all accounts reflect correct balances. Because again, there are some errors that will still give you a balance of debits and credits, pero may mali pa rin, right? So are there any questions for chapter 2? Right? So we're 1/3 done. So roughly baka we'll finish within 2 hours. Are there any questions about double entry accounting system, ledgers, trial balances? If there are none, kindly thumbs up. Kindly give me 2 minutes. Para lang I'll just get water. Yeah, okay. Okay. So done. So we're 1/3 done. And I hope na super clear para siya moving forward. So now we go to one of the major things na we need to focus on. So for the interest of time, I will focus on certain problems. But my expectation here is that you will devote your mastery into chapter 3, adjusting the accounts, in chapter 6, all the short problems related to inventory. Sa accruals and deferrals, I hope na you have enough time to revisit all the exercises, all the quiz items, so that you're experts in creating journal entries, be it for depreciation, prepaid rent, etc., etc. What I'll highlight are unique things or parang common mistakes na you should watch out for in terms of adjusting the accounts. But again, if you have time, make sure that you do, again, your quiz and your exercises related to accruals and deferrals. Maraming lalabas na items for chapter 3. And meron silang chaining factor. Therefore, make sure na mastered nito. If not, please ask me questions. Please give me exercises within tonight para we can answer. But I hope na you super master accruals and deferrals. So before anything else, let's go first to the underlying theory, right? So importante rin na you master the underlying theory. So accruals and deferrals, basically, we'll talk about cash basis and accrual basis later. But the essence here is that we're trying to uphold what we call the matching principle, wherein you have a revenue recognition, wherein you recognize your revenue when there's an increase in future economic benefits. Particularly here, just familiarize yourself what are the elements. So para lang as long as you understand. And then, when do you recognize expense? Through the matching principle, that expenses should be recognized in the same period a relevant revenue is recognized. So now that hopefully we're done with inventory, ma-appreciate nyo na tong example na to, right? Na again, you have costs. And costs are different with expenses. What's the difference? Your cost will be an inventory or part of your asset if the relevant revenue has not been sold. So, if we're talking about this car, it has a cost of 800,000 and then a selling price of 1.2 million. And in 2021, it was not sold. Then as you know, the cost will be 800,000 inventory because there is still no revenue. In 2022, when the car was sold, then we recognize two entries. One to recognize your revenue at 1.2 million, and then debit COGS, credit inventory of 800,000. So we're in essence, we're transferring the cost of 800,000 to an actual expense, right? So expense is actualized. So again, matching principle, expenses should be recognized in the same period a relevant revenue is recognized. Kapag wala pang revenue, then asset pa siya, right? So I hope super understand nyo to because of our inventory lesson. So put it simply, revenue recognition principle therefore is revenue is recognized when performance obligation is satisfied. Right? So pag nagawa mo na yung obligation mo. So again, what is revenue recognition? Marami tayong binigay na characteristics, but in essence, revenue recognition is what? When revenue is recognized when performance obligation is satisfied. Last, revenue recognition is when a performance obligation is satisfied. So that is your classic definition of what your revenue recognition principle is. Now, we can go na to cash basis and accrual basis. And as you know, in financial accounting, what we really follow is accrual basis. Pero as a refresher, what is the difference? Under cash basis, transactions are recorded based on when cash is received or paid. Meaning, if I receive money from my customer, regardless if I earned it or not, that would automatically be a revenue. So, kuwari, nagkaroon ako ng prepaid rent for 6 months. We know that it should be prorated every month of use. But under cash basis, if I had a prepaid rent of 1 million for the next 12 months, pagkabigay ko ng 1 million, it's an outright expense of prepaid expense 1 million. Right? So that's cash basis. Or for example, I have an unearned service revenue. Like, kuwari, mag-tutor ako, for example, and I'll tutor them next month pa. Pero that person gave me 50,000 pesos. Or sobrang exaggeration, sorry. 500 pesos. Even though it's unearned, since I'm under the cash basis, I received cash, and therefore, I'll treat that as a revenue. Right? But the major difference and the reason why sobrang hirap ng buhay natin in chapter 3 is that we follow accrual basis. That transactions are recorded based on occurrence. And that's why in the later chapters, we'll understand ano ba yung deferrals, ano ba yung accruals, right? So one of the exercises that was submitted for in the email was this really good exercise on paano kung binigay sa'yo yung revenues and expenses under cash basis. And then yung tinatanong sa'yo is, ang tinatanong sa'yo is, what is the revenue under accrual basis? Right? Wait, sorry. We'll just... Okay. There. So, binigay sa inyo is under cash basis, you have a revenue of 1 million and expenses of 500,000. Now, for this particular question type, it wants you to convert from cash basis to accrual basis, right? Given the following transactions. You have a prepaid rent transaction, an unearned service revenue transaction, a supplies, a salaries payable, and accrued revenues. Now, I hope na you master these types of exercises on how to convert from cash basis to accrual basis. So how do we solve this? First, we start with your cash basis balance. So under revenue, you have 1 million. Under expenses, 500,000. Step 1. Step 2, in essence, what you have to do is analyze ano ba yung ginawa niya under cash basis. We have to reverse that and then recognize it under accrual. So what do I mean by this? Let's go to transaction 1, right? So according to the problem, nung November 1 raw, they paid 4 months of rent worth 40,000. Now, part of this 500,000 is this 40,000 kasi nagbayad na sila eh. So they recognize already a 40,000 expense. So the very first thing that we have to do for prepaid rent is that we have to reverse the 40,000. Right? Kasi again, under this 500,000, they already treated the whole 40,000 as an expense. So the very first thing is we reverse the cash basis accounting. So 500,000 minus 40,000. Now, we solve. Ano ba yung accrual expense of the prepaid rent under accrual accounting? So, we calculate. It's 4 months of rent worth 40,000. So, my first question here is, how much is my monthly expense? So, 40,000 for 4 months, so 40 divided by 4. My monthly expense is 10,000. How many months have passed? I look at the dates. It's November 1, and then now it's December 31. Therefore, how many months have passed? I have a November rent expense. I have a December rent expense, so times 2. So now, I have 20,000 in expense based under accrual, and therefore, I'll record plus 20,000. So under this transaction, what I did was I reversed the cash basis. So I subtracted 40,000 and then added back the should be expense of 20,000, right? Are there any questions or clear naman what we did? I will continue with each of the transactions and I hope you see the pattern. Super important yung exercise na to in terms of our short probs, right? Next, there is an unearned service revenue. We received cash of 25,000 for services that will only start in January. Under cash basis, I know na since nakuha niya na, they recorded it as revenue. So this 25,000 is part of this 1 million. So again, I have to carve out 25,000. Now, how much of this unearned service revenue did I actually earn? Let's look at the dates. The date is January 1 mo pa raw i-perform yung obligation. Right? And therefore, in essence, you haven't earned any revenue. So we don't add back any revenue. So we just subtract 25,000 from the 1 million because this 25,000 that they receive in cash, they already included in the cash basis of revenue. Next, you bought supplies of 50,000. So again, yung 50,000 na yun, they outright expense the whole 50,000. So that 50,000 is part of this 500,000. So the very first thing I do is I subtract 50,000 so that it's back to zero. Right? Wala pa tayong expense related to supplies. Now the question is, how much would be our supplies expense if 20% of the supplies remain unused? So again, if you have supplies or any prepaid rent or whatever, you look at ano pa yung ilang percent yung used, ilang percent yung unused. The percentage used is your expense and the 20% unused represents your asset. Meaning, if you have 50,000 in supplies, which would represent 100%, if 20% remain unused, meaning 80% of that 50,000 you already used as supplies. So 50,000 times 0.8 is 40,000. So 40,000 out of that 50,000 is an actual supplies expense. Gets? And therefore, I have to add back 40,000 in expenses. Another way of solving this is 20% raw of 50,000 remains unused. So I have 10,000 unused. That would represent my supplies na assets. And therefore, 50 minus 10 is 40,000, which would represent my supplies expense, right? So if you're having a hard time parang understanding or following, redo all of the chapter 3 exercises and quizzes and then go back to this problem. But super important that you should know how to convert from cash basis to accrual basis. Next, on January 2, may salaries payable. Again, the difference here is that you paid for the 10,000 salaries expense on January 2. So this before December 31, wala ka pang cash outflow. And therefore, under expenses, under cash basis, this 10,000 or any component of it is not part of this 500,000. And therefore, we just ask ourselves, ano ba yung accrued expense natin out of this 10,000? So we know na 3 days out of the 5-day work week should have been expensed under December 31. So how do we do this? We just divide the total salary by 5 because 5-day work week. So we know that our daily expense is 2,000. Now, 3 days raw were incurred in December 30. So that's 29, 30, and 31. Therefore, times 3 days, may 6,000 akong expense that is not part of the cash basis expense, but it should have been an expense, right? So may 6,000 here. And then, finally, we have accrued revenues. Now, you bill the customer 100,000 but have not received the cash. So this is a revenue already, accounts receivable. Pero since walang cash component, they would have not included this in this revenue. So we add 100,000. So if we total the revenues and their adjustments, and we total the expenses and their adjustments, we'll be able to arrive with the accrual-based revenue of 1.75 million and 476 expenses based on accrual accounting. So again, this is a very crucial exercise. Are there any questions before we proceed to particular adjusting entries? Are there any questions on cash basis to accrual basis? Okay. So again, kindly review how this was solved, especially all of these transactions na minus 40 plus 20. Make sure na you understand why I had to parang subtract first and add back, right? But in essence, what I was just doing was I was reversing the cash basis accounting and then making the correct journal entries based on accrual accounting. So again, super important na you master this. Next, So let's go back to the theory. So we know that adjusting entries will be a crucial part of our exam. So now, what are or why do we need adjusting entries? So again, we need adjusting entries because of the revenue and expense recognition principle. Now, adjusting entries are required. Again, adjusting entries are required every time a company prepares financial statements. Huwag kayong malito. They are usually made on the last day of an accounting period. So, but then that does not necessarily mean it's year end. So in theory, it is required every time you prepare financial statements. So even if it's not year end, it is not an optional step. So it doesn't matter kung March 31 or April 30, etc., etc. Every time you prepare a financial statement, it is a required step to create your adjusting entries. Again, it is required. It is not an optional step. Every time you prepare your financial statements, be it monthly, be it quarterly, be it yearly, every time you make your financial statements, it is required to have adjusting entries, right? And under adjusting entries, we know that there are two types, right? Your deferrals or your prepayments, which is cash now, and then occur later. And then you have your accruals or incur now and then cash later. So if you receive cash now, but you recognize a revenue later, then that's unearned revenue. If you pay cash now, but then you recognize your expense later, that's prepaid expense. So under deferrals, you have two major subclasses, your unearned revenue and your prepaid expenses. On the other hand, you have your accruals. Under accruals, you have two types. You have your accrued revenues, wherein you recognize your revenue now, but you receive your cash later in the form of accounts receivable. Or you have your accrued expenses, where you recognize expense now, but you pay cash later. So super important to note under deferrals is that prepayments or deferrals, again, prepayments ensure that recognition of costs that have expired, ensures the recognition of costs that have expired over time. Again, important. Prepayments ensure the recognition of costs that expired over time. So be it deferrals, be it prepayments, whatever you call it, what's important to note here is that it ensures the recognition of costs that have expired over time. Now again, we have your corresponding adjusting entries for prepaid expenses and unearned revenue. Now, under adjusting entries, super crucial that you understand what are the states before adjustment. Meaning, before you adjust for your prepaid expenses, if you have not recognized any prepaid expenses, then your assets are overstated and your expenses are understated, right? And therefore, your adjusting entry would be debit expense, credit, asset to correct those overstatements and understatements. Now, be careful. It says here, expenses are understated. Pero you can also look at it as, if your expenses are understated, then therefore your equity is overstated. So before adjustments for prepaid expenses, your assets are overstated, your expenses are understated, or meaning your equity is overstated. For unearned revenue, before adjustment, super important for you to master. Liabilities are overstated, revenues are understated, or equity is understated. And therefore, your adjusting entry would be a debit liability, credit revenue. Right? So what are your examples of prepaid expenses? Your supplies, your prepaid rent, and your equipment are examples of prepaid expenses. What are your examples of unearned revenue? Unearned revenue, basically, right? So Another important thing that we discussed under chapter 3 is accumulated depreciation, which is a contra asset. So now, kindly take note, and this is super important again, depreciation merely estimates. It does not report actual changes in the value of assets. Again, depreciation merely estimates. It does not report actual changes in the value of assets. So as a contra asset, in your financial statements, you can expect that there is equipment at cost of 2,400, and then you have your act debt to lessen your equipment to its carrying amount, which is 2,360. But this is just a mere estimate, not reporting an actual change in the value of your assets, right? The normal balance of accumulated depreciation is credit because it's a contra asset, right? Next, for accruals naman, basically, you have two, accrued revenues, accrued expenses. Before accrued revenues, your assets are understated, and then your revenues are understated. And if your revenues are understated, equity is understated. For accrued expenses naman, your liabilities are understated, your expenses are understated, meaning if your expenses are understated, equity is overstated. So if there is a quiz item that asks you, so ano ba ang effect before adjusting for accrued expenses, what would be the state of your components? Then you have, meaning the answer would be that your liabilities are understated, your expenses are understated, and therefore your equity is overstated. So those are the three things you look out for. Kapag tinanong sa inyo what are the before adjustments for accrued revenues, ito rin yung titingnan nyo. So super important. So in essence, what usually happens is that you have your unadjusted trial balances, and then you basically make your accruals and your deferrals. So pagalingan lang gumawa ng journal entry. Once you make all of these adjusting entries, you summarize it in a table, and then you reflect the changes and adjust your trial balance. So now, expect similarly to your quiz na there would be a short problem that's chained, wherein it will ask you to probably create journal entries for each deferral, each accrual, and then at the end, it will ask you, what is the balance of net income, or what's the balance of your asset, or what's the balance of your liability? What you do first is you create your journal entries, you adjust your unadjusted trial balance, and then get your balances using the adjusted trial balance. So make sure that you're really good at creating journal entries, right? So again, I expect na you will take the time to master each deferrals, each accruals, but then I will just illustrate 1 to 2 examples from our previous lecture. Again, when you're working on adjusting entries, super crucial to create a timeline. Where are you now and what's happening, right? So right now, we're in March 31 and we're trying to adjust our entries. And apparently, what happened in March 1 was we bought supplies of 950 using cash. So we know that from March 1 to March 31, 1 month has passed, and a portion of that supplies asset has been consumed. Therefore, before adjustment, our assets are overstated and understated, and therefore, we have to lower it by the amount that it was consumed. According to the problem, the remaining office supplies was 50, meaning 900 was consumed. And therefore, our adjusting entry would be debit supplies expense, credit supplies of 900. So this is how we solve for it. So make sure na you visit how to solve for depreciation, how do you solve for salaries, wages payable, how do you solve for interest, super hirap nung interest. Ang mahirap dito is depreciation, prepaid rent, prepaid insurance, salaries, wages payable, and interest expense. So make sure na you know. But in essence, what we basically did was we adjusted. So ito yung balance before adjustment. So it was overstated, but because we adjusted it, we were able to find the correct balance of 50 supplies na debit and then credit debit of supplies expense of 900. So we should know or master the relationship of T accounts under adjusting entries. So meaning, you should know na, okay, ito yung beginning balance ko. Ito yung ending balance ko. Ito yung ending balance ko. And then ito yung nangyari in between. This credit of supplies, debit of supplies expense will refer to one adjusting entry of adjusting or recognizing the expense, right? So make sure na alam nyo yung T accounts in the relationship between supplies and supplies expense. That usually, pag bumababa yung supplies nyo, meaning there's a credit in your supplies, then that would mean that there's a corresponding debit to your supplies expense. Again, super importante na you understand or you master this T account relationship with supplies and supplies expense, right? So, again, pag bumaba yung supplies expense nyo, or correct, 950 to, and then may 50 ka, and then there's a missing amount, your gut feel dapat should be, a supplies was consumed, or supplies were consumed. And if 950 to and 50 to, then probably 900 was expense, and therefore, it's a credit supplies, debit supplies expense of 900. So, another thing, so aside from mastering, parang how do you make journal entries, you have to know how to work backwards. And if there's one exercise out of the quizzes and exercises that I want you to repeat, so if under chapter 3, I will redo the exercises if I were you, and then the exercises in the quizzes, and then I'll do E319. Why E319? E319 not only tests how good you are at creating your entries, it also tests how good you are at understanding the relationship between your T accounts, which is crucial for a lot of short problems for the midterms. So basically, it gave you 5 journal transactions, and then it gave you balances. So basically, the very first thing that you do is what? Kapag meron na kayong binigyan na kayo ng ganito, binigyan na kayo ng mga accounts, your very first instinct should be, especially kung nakikita nyo na 2020, 2019, binigay yung beginning and ending. They probably want me to make a T accounts. Pag gano'n na. So, if you see parang 2020, 2019, and then based on the given, your gut feel should be, pinapa-T accounts ako ng problem na to. So again, be careful. Yung 2020 represents your ending balance. 2019 represents your beginning balance. So again, I'll make a T account for unearned revenue. And then, using the given, meron pang mga beginning balance. So, may 161,000 ka raw na service revenue. And then, yun. So now, we journalize and post. So, we know na if 2019 were all collected, my balance is 8,000. My balance is 8,000. Therefore, na-collect raw to. Therefore, it's debit cash credit AR of 8,000, right? So again, see how parang it affects 2 accounts, cash and AR. Gift certificates outstanding at end of 2019 were all redeemed. So now, nasi-zero out raw yung unearned revenue mo of 25,000. So debit unearned service revenue. And then finally, you can recognize it as a service revenue of 25,000, right? And then 3.1, nag-issue ka raw ng 38,000 worth of gift certificates. And gift certificates are unearned service revenue because you get money, pero hindi mo pa nagagawa yung service, right? And therefore, it's debit cash of 38,000 and credit unearned revenue of 38,000. And then, a portion of these was used by the recipients. The remainder was still outstanding. So we know that the entry here is unearned service revenue, credit service revenue, right? So this is where your understanding of the T accounts begin. We know that in terms of all of the transactions, wala nang mag-a-affect ng unearned revenue account. And therefore, I can solve for X. What is this missing debit of unearned service revenue? So by using this equation, I will arrive with 21,000 pala to. And if 21,000 pala to, then tama na my ending balance would be 17,000. And because alam kong 21,000 yung unearned service revenue, because of the double entry accounting system, my service revenue will be 21,000 also. Right? Next, in the 4, nag-perform ka raw ng service or billed. So, meaning, you know that your journal entry here should be debit AR, credit service revenue. But how much? Again, may isa pa tayong missing sa service revenue. We know that all of the transactions already have been discussed under service revenue if we look at the given. So next, we solve for what is this X that's missing? So we solve for that, get 115,000. We know that in order to get 161,000 ending balance, we need a credit of service revenue of 115,000. And therefore, 115,000 yung AR rin because of double entry accounting system. And then lastly, accounts receivable for 2020 were partially collected. So now we just have to make sure that the ending balance of a receivable is 16,000. So ano yung missing here? It's 99,000. And therefore, it will balance. So again, super important na we know this. Right? So now, I will parang change this given so that yun kasi na-solve nyo because binasa nyo yung problem. Meaning, there was an actual story. Now, the challenge for you would be able to master the T account relationships of number 1, cash and accounts receivable. So, this is super important that you follow so that hindi tayo mawawala. Number 1, I am not providing anything new. We're still talking about E19. Right? Ang ginawa ko lang is that with this 40 accounts, I isolated our cash T account and our accounts receivable account. And then I made the same. So 8,000, 38,000, 99,000, 145,000. The only thing I added was that since walang beginning balance si cash, let's just assume na 35,000 to, right? So 145,000 plus 35,000 is 180,000. Yun lang yung iniba ko. The rest are the same. You look at AR, you have a beginning balance of 8,000. And then you have your debit of 8,000, credit of 8,000, credit of 99,000, debit of 115,000 to get your ending balance of 16,000. Now, if ang gagawin ko is that it's color-coded. Journal entry 1, AR collected as cash because of past year, 8,000 to, 8,000 to, 99,000 to, 99,000 to. Now, let's say takpan natin yung AR collection for the current year. And takpan natin yung AR from service revenue. So again, ito yung given lang. Ito yung T accounts na we were able to solve for E319. And then basically, ang ginawa ko lang, tinakpan ko lang yung related. So tinakpan ko yung journal entry 5 and then tinakpan ko si journal entry 4 or AR from service revenue. Now, ito yung magkakaroon tayo. Right? Na hindi natin alam yung AR collected for the current year and the AR from service revenue. So this sub-scenario is asking us, how can you find your AR from service revenue for this year and your AR collected as cash for the current year if you were given the following? Your AR year 1, year 2, your cash year 1, year 2, your AR collected the past year, and if you recognize an unearned service revenue of 38,000. So basically, alam na natin yung sagot dito. Right? But if sa exam, ang binigay sa inyo is itong given lang, and then it's asking you to find AR collected or AR from service revenue, this is a good way to make sure na you really master the relationship between your cash and your AR. So step 1 is to plug in your values. Step 1 is create a T account for cash, create a T account for your AR, beginning balance of 8,000, check. Ending balance of 16,000, check. Tapos na natin itong given. Next, you have a beginning normal balance of 35 and ending balance of 180. 35, 180. And then we know that AR collected. So let's look. If you collect AR, that would mean debit cash, credit, AR. And therefore, this 8,000 will be debit 8,000, credit 8,000. Next, the last given, you recognize raw an unearned service revenue. If you recognize an unearned service revenue, what usually happens is you get cash, but you haven't earned the revenue related to that cash. Therefore, the journal entry here is debit cash, credit unearned service revenue of 38,000. So now, we know na 38,000 to. Sorry, I will just adjust. Sorry, kindly give me a moment. Sorry, wait. Kindly give me 2 minutes. I think nag-crash yung PowerPoint. There. So basically, parang given these figures, you're being asked to identify what are your AR that's collected from current year and your AR from service revenue. It sounds intimidating, but by using all of these given, you'll be able to see na there's this missing debit under cash that would represent an AR collection for the current year. And because there's an AR collection, there's a corresponding credit here. So ito yung 1. And then, you know that AR from service revenue means debit AR, credit service revenue. So there's another missing in accounts receivable here in order to get your 16,000 ending balance. So basically, kapag ganito yung format and then may T account kayo, you just basically solve for X. So you look at cash, there is only 1 missing in cash. And then under AR, there are 2 missing accounts. So intuitively, ang uunahin ko is yung cash na missing. So we can first solve for what is the AR collected from the current year. So how to solve this is that Currently, I have a beginning balance of 35. I have AR collected of 8,000. I have a recognition of 38. So I have a 81,000 currently. In order to make this an ending balance of 180, I need another debit. So 180 minus 81 is 99,000. So now I know that 99,000 yung AR collected sa current year. So I was able to solve one. Since I debited this because debit cash, credit AR of 99,000, isa na lang yung missing sa AR. So how do we solve for X in order to make the 8,000 into 16,000? Currently, my subtotal of credits is 107,000. And then I have an 8 na debit. So 99,000 yung difference. And therefore, I need 115,000 on the debit side to make this 123,000 to get 16,000. So in terms of mga T account short problems, again, it's just number 1, make your T accounts. Number 2, plug in your transactions. And then number 3, figure out how to make sense of your beginning and ending. So again, in terms of this particular scenario, important na you master the relationship between cash and accounts receivable. Na okay, this 180,000 doesn't make sense unless there was this AR collection for the current year. And because my collection this year, that will affect both my cash and AR. So I need to first solve this so that I can find the last missing link, which is accounts receivable from service revenue. So ganun lang. So that's how you analyze using T accounts. Another example, what if tatlo yung pinapa-analyze sa inyo? What is the relationship between your unearned service revenue, your revenue, and your accounts receivable? Again, we're taking away from the same example, E319. So, dapat gets nyo how we were able to arrive with these T accounts. But, and then I color-coded what are the ones pertaining to the same journal entry. So, journal entry 4 will affect accounts receivable and revenue. Journal entry 3.2 will affect revenue and unearned revenue, right? So, let's say that sa exam, nagdagdag ng isang component lang, ginawang cash sales. So, same T accounts, all of them, pero ang isang walang binago is that may 9,000 here. So, my ending balance from 161 naging 170,000. Now, magtakip tayo. Let's say, ang missing is yung AR mo from service revenue, represented by this color. Let's say the second missing is a redeemed unearned service revenue of batch 2. And the last missing is cash sales. Right? So, basically, ito na yung sagot, pero tinakpan ko lang. So, by reverse engineering, ito yung magiging itsura ng short prob. Nagbigay sila ng balances of your AR, your service revenue, and your USR or unearned service revenue. And because there are beginning or ending dates, since there are beginning and ending dates, I know na I have to make a T account for accounts receivable, service revenue, and unearned service revenue. So be careful in plugging in. So beginning balance first, 8,000, 16,000 for AR, 25, 25,000, 170 for revenue, and then 25,000 and 17,000 for unearned service revenue. Next, you look at the given. Meron raw na collect na AR from the previous year worth 8,000. So that would be what? The credit AR and may cash na debit, right? So debit AR, debit 8,000, credit AR of 8,000. So ito lang yung na-affect for this one particular transaction, this 8,000 here. Next, you were able to collect AR collected from the current year of 99,000. So again, it will only affect your receivables and your cash, pero wala naman si cash dito. Next, you redeemed raw an unearned service revenue, or you finally were able to recognize an unearned service revenue from the batch 1. And therefore, that would be debit unearned service revenue, credit, debit unearned service revenue, credit revenue of 25,000. And then when you recognize your unearned service revenue of 38,000, then that's basically just a what? Debit cash, credit unearned service revenue of 38,000. So again, you plug in the beginning balances and then you plug in the given. And then you'll notice na sa accounts receivable, there seems to be a missing component. That's probably an accounts receivable from service revenue. Under unearned revenue, hindi siya nagbabalance because probably there's a missing unearned service revenue that that pertains to batch 2 na recognize ko na. And then under revenue, maraming missing. Yung A, B, and C, yung cash sales. So how do you solve for this? There are 3 T accounts. And then by analyzing it, si accounts receivable muna yung isa lang yung account na missing. And therefore, how do we make 8,000 into 16,000 using the different accounts? Right now, it has a subtotal of 107,000 credit and a debit of 8,000. We need to the subtotal to 123. So ang missing account here is 115,000 and 115,000. Next, so alam na natin yung first na tinatanong. What is AR from service revenue? Next, may unearned revenue ka. There's a missing account. We compute in order to get the ending balance. So 21,000. 21,000 yung unearned service revenue. So now, here, isa na lang yung missing nyo, which is cash sales. So you just solve for X to get 9,000. So it's okay na right now hindi nyo pa na-absorb. But what I'm just saying is, super important for you to understand the relationships of these T accounts. Your accounts receivable, how it affects your revenue, how it affects, and how your unearned revenue affects your revenue. Do this exercise scenario 1 and scenario 2 again and again. I made it simple na I based it on E19. So that alam nyo na yung tamang answer. Then tinakpan ko lang to show you na basically ganito lang yung ginagawa sa inyo sa short probs. Na there was an underlying story and then may tinatakpang portion lang yung T account. And then we're just asking you, can you solve for the missing? So an example for that is if binigay sa inyo yung balances ng AR with certain transactions and it's asking you for these balances, all you have to do is create the T accounts, understand the relationship so that you can find ano ba yung mga butas in your T accounts so that you can solve it chronologically. Same with scenario 2, right? Na dapat maganda yung understanding nyo that you're able to derive ano ba yung mga different or missing transactions in order for me to make sense of the ending balances of the given. So yun. Are there any questions? So I know medyo daunting that short prob type, but mas okay na magulat kayo tonight and talagang itry nyo understand how you were able to solve it given na alam nyo yung whole E319. And then sa exam, kapag maraming binigay sa inyong given and then pinapati accounts kayo, tapos may mga butas in the T accounts, you know na, okay, ganito pala yung relationship ni service revenue kay unearned service revenue. So the reason I'm doing this is so that you know na merong ganong short problem type na it will give you a lot of given, then you'll have to do a T account. Yeah, I will be sharing the PowerPoint also for everyone's sake so that you can review rin on your own time. Yeah. Thank you for that question. Yeah. So we're done with adjusting entries na normal. For theory, I will trust na you will understand kung alin lang may alternative method. So we have deferrals and accruals, right? But sino lang yung may alternative method? Si deferrals or si prepayments. Particularly, which ones have alternative methods? Supplies, prepaid rent, prepaid insurance, unearned service revenue, unearned rent revenue. Lahat ng deferrals except depreciation have alternative methods. Again, which one of the adjusting entries have alternative methods? Only deferrals or prepaid expenses, unearned revenue, except equipment and depreciation. And then, basically, ito lang yung master formula of the alternative method for prepaid expense and unearned revenue. I trust that because of your exercises, you'll understand how to do the alternative method, right? But in essence, regardless if you do the alternative method for adjusting entries, you should still have the same ending balances, right? So that ends chapter 3. Are there any questions before we move on to chapter 4? I think, especially for those who are attending right now, please be candid kung hindi nyo na-gets yung any of the exercises I've mentioned. This is the time to ask. You can PM me in the chat or you can even unmute and then ask me. So himayan natin yung mga exercises na I was discussing. But again, I will share the PowerPoint and hopefully by then you'll be able to understand the exercises. Are there any other questions? If none, kindly thumbs up if we can proceed to chapter 4. Okay. Yeah. Wait, sorry. I'll give me 2 minutes. I will just make sure na I was able to discuss everything for this. So that ends chapter 3. If there are no questions, we can go to chapter 4. Right? So for those that are attending, thank you so much. But if pagod na kayo and then you need a break, feel free to step out. I won't take it against you. Again, this is a crash course talaga of like all the theory questions, all the short probs for the exam. So talagang masakit siya sa ulo. So if ever you need a break, you can sign out. I promise I will upload directly after the session and then I'll send in the PowerPoint also sa Facebook. Yeah. Yun. So with that said, we're halfway done. So we have chapter 4. So chapter 4, conceptually, madali lang siya. We just complete the accounting cycle, right? So what are the accounting cycle? You analyze your business transaction so that you can journalize your entries. So you journalize your entries per transaction. Then from there, you post to your ledger accounts or your T accounts. So again, ledger is just a formal version of your T account. Then you prepare your unadjusted trial balance. After you prepare your unadjusted trial balance, you create your adjusting entries, which is a required step every time you make your financial statements. After that, you get your adjusted trial balance so that you can prepare your financial statements. And then you do 2 things. You close your entries and you prepare your post-closing trial balance. So now, we'll focus muna on periodic transactions. And we were saying that one way that could help you in terms of your worksheet is parang in order to help you organize your data at an earlier date, and it could serve as your basis for your financial statement, you can opt to do a worksheet. Right? And I hope na you already know how to do a worksheet, but I want to point out one of the crucial errors na I hope you don't make in the midterms. So this is the worksheet. Number one, your worksheet is organized by your numbers sa chart of accounts, which would normally be what? Assets muna, then your liabilities, and then your equity, and then your revenues, and then your expenses. And then you have your 3 columns, your adjusted trial balance, your income statement, and your statement of financial possession. Now, let's go to scenario 1. I want to focus on the totals. So I want to focus here. And I want to eliminate the adjusted trial balance. Now, if you notice, if we isolate the subtotals of our debits and credits for the income statement and the debits and the credits for the balance sheet, hindi siya balanse. 12,800 credit in the income statement. So in the income statement, our credit is bigger. 12,800 is bigger than your debit of 9,894. On the other hand, sa balance sheet, mas malaki si debit of 28,050. Kapag nakita nyo na the credit is bigger in the income statement and that the debit is bigger than in the balance sheet, you already know that it's a net income. So basically, ang gagawin nyo lang is, okay, mas mataas si 12,800. So I need to add something to 9,894, which is to make it balanced, right? So which is 2,906. And then here, yung 28,050, kailangan ko pataasin si credit to make it here. So 2,906. So this is a credit in your balance sheet. Since this is a credit in your balance sheet, then you know na this is a net income. Right? So again, paano mo malalaman kung net income using worksheet? Number 1, if your IS of 12,800 or your credit is bigger than your debit in your income statement, or your debit is bigger than your credit. So ang adjustments mo would be a credit in your balance sheet of 2,906. And again, since it's a credit to our balance sheet, then it's a net income. So I hope na you already mastered this. Na after mong gawin yung worksheet, hindi talaga magbabalance si income statement and si balance sheet. Merong mas maliit, and then you have to add in order to never. So another tip for worksheet, you never subtract in a worksheet. You never subtract in a worksheet. So meaning, to make it balance, you look at the bigger number and then you add to the smaller number, right? So 12,800, so I added 2,906 here. I added 2,906 here. So to get the 28,050 and the 12,800. So this is what a net income looks like under a worksheet, right? Now, what if it's a net loss? Basically, binaliktad ko lang yung given. So mas malaki si debit ngayon, mas malaki si credit in. So therefore, yung adjustment ko was a credit in the income statement and then a debit in our balance sheet. So yung adjustment ko is a debit in the balance sheet, so I know it's a net loss. Right? And since it's a net loss, then it's a net loss of 2,906. Right? Again, you never subtract in a worksheet. So titingnan mo lang ano yung mas malaki and then you adjust. So mas malaki si 12,800, so adjust sa credit of 2,906. Mas malaki si credit, so adjust natin si debit. And then paano mo malalaman kung net income or net loss? You look at your balance sheet adjustment. If the balance sheet adjustment is a credit, so my adjustment here is a credit of 2,906 to increase my credit, then that's a net income. If yung debit ko naman yung kulang and my adjustment is a debit in the balance sheet, then it's a net loss. Please, 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 please make sure na you know this. Super important. Sayang yung points. Again, make sure na you get the worksheet. Number 1, you never subtract in a worksheet. Meaning, you follow the bigger number. So, follow the bigger number will give you the difference. So, you have a value. 2,906. The next question is, net income ba siya or net loss? To be able to know what the net income or net loss, you look at the balance sheet column and then you look at the adjustment. Since ang adjustment is a credit of 2,906, in order to increase the smaller credit here, then that is a net income. Pag net loss, yung debit mo mas maliit or your credit is bigger in the balance sheet. So your adjustment is a debit of 2,906 and therefore net loss, right? So that's the worksheet. And super important, the one I discussed kanina. So kindly master. And then we just close the books, right? In closing, kindly remember that there are temporary accounts and permanent accounts. And that the only thing na super important to remember, and I want to highlight, so I expect na you mastered this already, is that temporary accounts begin each new fiscal period with a zero balance. Meaning, your revenue, your expenses, your owner drawings, your temporary accounts will begin each new fiscal period with zero balance. So, how do you close your entries? I trust na you already understand how to close. So, you close your revenue accounts muna to your income summary. You close your expense accounts to your income summary. And then, since bigger yung 12,800, technically you have a credit of 2,906. You want to zero out your income summary. So you have a debit income summary, credit owner's capital of 2,906. And then, you close your income summary to owner's capital, that's step 3, and then you close your owner's drawing. So now, this is something I want to highlight. It looks complicated, but if there's something else na you have to master for closing the books, it's these 2 concepts. That ultimately, everything closes out to owner's capital. That your net income or your profit, so pag may net income ka or profit, you expect to credit this to owner's capital, as you can see in this example. Meaning, there is in order to close out this net income, we debited sa income summary, pero ultimately, ang effect niya is a credit to your owner's capital. So again, you go back to chapter 1. Your net income increases your equity. Your equity has a normal credit balance. Since your net income increases your owner's capital, then that's a credit to your owner's capital ultimately. Pag revenue, ultimately it increases your owner's capital. So any revenue is a credit to your owner's capital at the end of the period. Your expense lessens your owner's capital. So it's a debit to OC. Same with net loss. Kapag net loss decreases your owner's capital and therefore it's a debit to your owner's capital. And then owner's drawings, it lowers your equity, so it's a debit to your owner's capital. So again, important na you know how to close, but important also na in theory, you understand na there's only 2 things that happen. Na lahat ng temporary accounts are close to your owner's capital. So this is a master list of their effects. Kindly make sure na you memorize these or at least understand how to derive. I explained kanina what was the logic behind it. And then kindly take note that everything else are zeroed out. Revenues are 0. Expenses are 0. Income summary, 0. Owner's drawings, 0. Everything, all temporary accounts are zeroed out or has a 0 balance at the start of every fiscal period. Lahat yon napupunta kay owner's capital. And if you want like the direct, kasi ito, hindi mo alam how the revenue affects owner's capital eh. Parang kailangan mo muna siyang ipasok sa income summary and then pupunta siya sa owner's capital. But in essence, ito yung shortcut. Na a revenue ultimately will be a credit to your owner's capital. An expense will be a debit to your owner's capital, etc. etc. Right? So I trust na you'll memorize this. And then we just summarize. So we're done now with adjusting entries. Right? So we're done with closing entries. We're done with adjusting entries. So we have reversing entries and correcting entries na lang. So for reversing entries, two things to take note. Reversing entries are optional. Reversing entries are optional. Number two, you reverse your entries at the start of the period. So zero pa rin yung temporary accounts mo. But then when you reverse it, doon nagkakaroon ng weird balance. Right? And then, reversing entries affect one income statement account and one balance sheet account. Again, reversing entries are optional. That's important number one. Number two, reversing entries affect one income statement account and one balance sheet account. Okay? One income statement account, one balance sheet account. So, ano lang yung nire-reverse mong entries? Only accrued revenues and accrued expenses. So again, what are the only accounts that you reverse? Accrued revenues and accrued expenses. Right? So, accruals lang yung nire-reverse natin. And again, as you can see from the reversing entries, it affects one income statement account, be it your revenue or expense, and one balance sheet account, be it your asset or liability. So last, you create correcting entries. So correcting entries, syempre they're required, but they're avoidable. So technically, they're not required because if you do it properly, then you don't need correcting entries, right? So correcting entries are avoidable. And it affects a combination of accounts. So kindly revisit question number 6 on Ancoris company. So basically, anong framework natin pag correcting entry? What is, what should be? What is the wrong entry made? What should be the wrong entry? The correct what is what is the wrong entry made? What should be is what is the correct entry? And then, there are two ways to solve for it. You reverse the wrong, so baliktarin mo lang si inventory, and then you make the right. So, you just copy this. Or you can compound it. Now, for the Ancoris company, inventory is debit inventory, debit purchases of 9,559, credit 15,400. Kindly take note, when you're redoing the Ancoris company, it is a periodic inventory system, kaya may purchases. If this was perpetual, the correct entry would have been just simply inventory 15,400, credit cash of 15,400. So again, tama to kapag periodic inventory. Pero be careful na pag perpetual, iba yung correcting entry mo. Wala si purchases. Lahat yan inventory. Debit inventory of 15,400, credit cash of 15,400. So we're done with adjusting entries, closing entries, reversing entries, and correcting entries. Adjusting entries required every time a financial statement happens. Closing entries required every time you close. Reversing entries optional. It only affects your accruals and it only affects one income statement account, one balance sheet statement account. Correcting entries are avoidable. Correcting entries, you only create it every time you notice there are errors. Last, for chapter 4, make sure that you know how to classify your balance sheet. So, know the definition of your current, non-current, current liab, non-current liab. So, let's first classify the account. So, basically, visit yung 4.15 on how to classify. Now, I want to add an addendum. Paano kung for this, nagkaroon ka ng ganito? it's asking you two things. Given two types of notes payable, tell me what is the interest payable, and then tell me what are the non-current liabilities. So number one, I want you to be really careful about notes payable. Okay? So I want you to be careful. I want you to make a table like this. First, make sure that you know when it was issued. Kasi I don't want you to think na 22 months. So obviously, it's more than 12 months. It's non-current liab. That's wrong. That's wrong. You don't look at the term. You look at what are the months left after December 2014 if that is the year-end period. If ang natira pang months is more than 12 months, that's non-current. If less than 12 months, it's current liability. So how do you figure it out? First, you look at the issue date. It was issued at February 1. Right now is December 2014. So there's 22 months. Now the question is, on December 2014, how many months are left in the term of the notes payable? So now we know na from February 1, 2014 to December 31, 2014, how many months have passed? 11 months, right? February, blah, blah, blah. So 12 months in a year, January lang yung nawala. So from February to December, that's 11 months. So out of the 22 months of the term, 11 months have actually expired. So how many months are left after December 2014 or our year end? 11 months. 11 months. Let's do the next. Second note payable. It was issued on September 1, 2014 with a term of 20 months. How many months have passed from September 1, 2014, the issue date, to the December 2014? So September, October, November, December. 4 months have passed. So 20 minus 4 is equal to 16 months. So at year end, the date of our balance sheet, there is an 11 months remaining for the February 1 notes payable. And then for the September 1, there are 16 months left. And therefore, sino yung current, sino yung non-current? Yung 11 months yung current. Yung 16 months yung non-current. So be careful. You don't look at the term. You look at how many months are left at the balance sheet date. If it's less than 12 months, if it will expire within the 12 months, then it's current. If it's not, then non-current. So, if ito yung principal ko, what is my non-current liability? It's 300,000. 300,000 will fall due 16 months after my balance sheet date. So, it's non-current. Compared to my February 1, 2014 na 11 months. So, next year, sure ako mag-expire yon. So, 100,000 is current, 300,000 is non-current. Question number 2. What is your interest payable if interest is paid every January 1? Today is December 31. I'll have to pay the interest from the issue date of 2014 to year end. When you're asking, when it's being asked for you to compute for interest, please know that the interest rate will always be the annual interest rate unless stated otherwise. Again, if the interest rate is given, that is the annual interest rate. If the interest rate is given, that's the annual interest rate. Meaning, if you have a principal of 100,000 and you have a 12% interest, our annual interest payable is 12,000. That's for one whole year. Because that's 100 times 12. Sorry. Times 0.12. So 12. Ito naman, 8% annual interest rate. So my annual interest payable is 0.08. So 24,000. Now, that doesn't mean na yun yung interest payable ko. That refers to 1 whole year. We go back to ilang months ba ng interest yung hindi ko nabayaran. So now, when was the interest na not paid? So you haven't paid for the interest from February to December, which represents 11 months out of 12. And then for the September, 4 out of 12. So we prorate. Yung 12,000 na yearly expense, we divide that by 12 to get a monthly expense of interest expense of 1,000. So 11 months have passed. So technically, I have an interest payable of 11,000 interest payable from February to December. Yung isa naman, I have 24,000 yearly interest expense. I divided by 12 to get the monthly. To get 2,000, yung 2,000, you multiply that by 4 because September, October, November, December, 8,000. So ano yung sagot ko sa question 1? Total non-current liability of 30,000. What is my interest payable? It's 19,000, right? So that officially ends chapters 1 to 4. So that's like half of your theory and your half of your short probs. Now, we will go to inventory. So again, thank you so much for staying. But I will now move on to chapter 5. So now, like what I've mentioned, treat this recording as your midterm reviewer 1, which will cover the whole theory and all the nuances for short probs for chapters 1 to 4. Now, for inventory, I will leave it up to the class to really answer all the inventory exercises na you can, from the quizzes to the exercises. I'll try by tomorrow morning to parang have another video lecture of mga inventory exercises naman. But I can't assure you na I'll be able to post it in time. So, I'll leave it up to you na you know na I already highlighted at the start that super important si inventory, right? So now, dalawa na lang yung i-discuss ko for this recording. One would be all theory lang. Theory for chapter 5, chapter 6. And then I will discuss rin the quiz for inventory. So, we're now into chapter 5. So chapter 5 is a deep dive of inventory. And under inventory, under theory, you just have to know na you have to be able to define a merchandising company. So you have to differentiate between a service company, a merchandising company, and a manufacturing company. And then, super important that you know the definition of what an operating cycle is. Na operating cycle in its simplest sense is the time it takes for you to buy your assets, to convert that asset to saleable goods, to sell those goods to customers, and then ultimately to get your cash. Again, I'll repeat. Super important, so I'll repeat. Operating cycle is the time it takes to buy assets, to convert them to saleable goods, to sell them, and then ultimately get your cash. That's the definition of what an operating cycle is. Next, fundamental inventory systems. Please memorize the definition of what an inventory is. Now, I want to highlight one thing. It says here that the inventory is held for sale in the ordinary course of business. In the ordinary course of business. And therefore, if I hold inventory for an extraordinary course of business, that's not an inventory. So pag may nakita kayong extraordinary course of business, that's not an inventory. So make sure na you master the definition of inventory. If it's held for extraordinary course of business, that's not an inventory. Next, for theory, make sure na you know the theory and the difference between your perpetual and your periodic. Your perpetual recognizes COGS each time a sale occurs. sa periodic, you only determine your COGS at the end. But regardless kung perpetual, regardless kung periodic, you are required to conduct a physical count at the end of the period to just make sure na tama yung balance. Regardless of cost flow, regardless kung perpetual or periodic, you're required to have an inventory count, a physical inventory count. Now, under perpetual, we know what are the things that affect cost of goods sold. I want you to remember na always or all cash and credit sales will always affect cost of goods sold. However, that is not true for sales return and allowances. Okay? So, if I ask you, ano lang yung types of transactions that will always affect your cost of goods sold? The answer would be cash and credit sales. Sometimes, sales and returns and allowance will affect your cost of goods sold, but it will depend upon whether it's material or immaterial, right? So please remember na during the Shepherd Co exercise, okay, it affects, sales return allowance affects cost of goods sold if it has a realizable value, if it has a if the cost is material, but if the cost is immaterial, then it won't affect your cost of goods sold. So under the perpetual system, it's only in certain sales return and allowance wherein COGS is affected. So again, I want to highlight, under perpetual inventory system, transactions that always affects cost of goods sold would be cash and credit sales. But it's never always certain sales return allowance. So it's always cash and credit sales, but then it's only certain transactions that have sales returns and allowance. So please make sure na you understand or get why that is. Now we highlight the difference. So under perpetual, you know naman na we have temporary accounts under periodic. So that's the only difference. Na same yung journal entries, nagkakaiba lang yung names. The purchases, freight in PRA and PD are temporary accounts. For sales, the second difference is that sa perpetual, you recognize COGS every time a sale occurs. Sa periodic, you still record sales every time it occurs. You still record sales every time it occurs. The only difference is yung COGS at the end of the period, sa periodic. Right? And then the last would be adjusting entries, closing entries. So you always follow the physical count because it's the more correct. You do your closing entries. And that's basically the differences. Nasa periodic, mas mahirap. Now, in terms of presentation, there are two forms of presentation, nature of expense and function of expense. And we were saying na, generally, kapag inventory, be prepared to make the function of expense income statement. And then understand what gross profit rate is. So this is, please, as you can see for chapters quiz 4, quiz 5, sobrang sayang kung hindi nyo gets what a gross profit rate is and how to apply. So net sales is 100%. If I have a gross profit rate of 30%, then I have a COGS of 70%. Please master gross profit rate. Sayang yung pinag-aralan nyo sa inventory kung hindi nyo gets si gross profit rate. Right? So in essence, I want you to redo E514 or si Holloway Cosmetics, si Jane Grocery, so that you can appreciate how you write the expanded income statement under the function of expenses. Now you get your net sales, you less your COGS to get your gross profit, and then you less your operating expenses to get your income from operations, and then you less your SGA to get your net income. So now, don't be intimidated. I'm sure maraming lalabas sa quiz or sa midterms na guguluhin kayo. When it comes to solving for net income, or anything else, pag inventory, your go-to bread and butter is your nature of expense comprehensive income statement. Please master this formula. So, correct. Tatlo yung binigay sa inyo. You have an annual sales of 10,000, a GP rate of 40% based on sales, and an SG or selling general administrative expenses of 20% of sales. Ngayon, magpapanik ka. Kasi ang tatanong sa'yo, net income. Don't be afraid. Number 1, create this comprehensive income statement. Second, understand the problem. It said 40% raw. Well, number 1, walang sinabi na sales return or allowance, walang sinabi na sales discount. So, net sales ko is 10,000. We're done with the first part. Next, sinabi na the gross profit rate is 40% of sales. So, alam ko na, because I know the gross profit rate, 10,000 times 40%. 10,000 times 0.4. So, gross profit ko is 10 times 0.4. Ang gross profit ko is 4,000. So, therefore, my cost of goods sold is 10 minus 4, 6,000. Next, may OPEX ba tayo or operating expenses? Walang sinabi si problem, so 0 to. Next, sabi, the selling good administrative expense is 20% of annual sales. So, 10,000 times 0.2 will be equal to my selling goods administrative expense, which will be here. 2,000. So since 0 yung OPEX ko, my income from operations is 4,000. I have a 2,000 for SGA rate of 20% to get my net income of 2,000. Right? So yun lang. Actually, yun lang naman yung kailangan yung i-master sa theory for this. Yun. And then, finally, for mastering inventory, here are the theory portions na I just want to remind you of. Number 1, please be a master at recognizing inventory. So, inventory inclusions. So, again, you follow the legal test, right? I'll leave it up to you to master the legal test. Again, pag FOB shipping point buyer, you include. And then FOB destination pag si seller. So, for here, just memorize or familiarize yourself on when the ownership of goods gets transferred, right? And then, this is what I want to highlight. Now, from the point of view of a buyer, kapag may shipping point, then si buyer will be the one to pay. And therefore, the buyer will record the journal entry of freight in or inventory, depende kung perpetual or periodic siya, credit cash. Now, paano kung it's a purchase pero destination point? Ang magbabayad ng freight is si seller. So, no journal entry from buyer pag destination point, but si seller will recognize freight out, debit freight out, credit cash. And freight out is a transportation expense. And freight out is excluded from transportation expense. So, I want you to master freight terms. I want you to memorize the ones highlighted in yellow, right? FOB shipping point, debit freight in, inventory from the assets buyer, from the point of view of buyer, credit cash, and then for destination point, it's a freight out or a transportation expense, and freight out is excluded from, sorry, this is not transportation expense. Freight out is excluded from inventory. Right? And then sa consigned goods, just make sure you master kung sino si consignor or si consignee. So here, one of the things na I want to highlight lang is please redo McHale aside from your quiz exercises, and I want you to look at number 4. Now, this is my tip. Number 1, memorize your legal test for inventory inclusions. Number 2, look at the dates. Now, I want you to look at the date when counting inventory and name that as inclusion date. So under McHale, the inclusion date was December 31. Now, be careful. Not only should you apply yung legal test, but you should also understand when these things are happening. So in number 4, December 31, yung inclusion date. Now, ang transaction kasi nito is sale na shipping point. So, in essence, supposedly, sold goods in transit under shipping point should have been excluded. Right? But take note that on December 31, it's not yet in transit. Therefore, wala kang pake kung ano yung freight terms. It was picked up January 1. So, ang importanteng date is inclusion date of December 31. So, it's not in transit yet. And therefore, it should be included. So, yung 30,000 na cost should be included. Right? So, again, number 1, master your legal test. Number 2, know when you're counting your inventory. Since you're counting your inventory in December 31, ignore anything that happens in January 1 onwards. So kahit ito, technically, it's SSP, which we know is SSP is exclude, or sale of FOB shipping. Since it happened on January 1, a day after the inclusion date, you still include it in the inventory. Okay? So please be careful. So now, in terms of theory, I want you to master. So inventory inclusion, there's probably gonna be like 2 to 3 short probs for that. Cost flow, there's a huge chunk. Probably like around 5 short probs. Make sure you master cost flow assumption. I'll send the answer key to the exam. To the quiz later. And you have 4. You have your specific identification, FIFO, LIFO, and WAVE. Another thing to memorize under cost flow. Dapat alam nyo tong table na tong dalawa. If I ask you, in a period of decreasing prices, ano yung pinakamataas na gross profit? FIFO or LIFO? Dapat alam nyo. Or sinong mas mababa na cost of sales? FIFO or LIFO? So please memorize this table, or at least understand. But if I were you, I'd just memorize it. And then understand. Parang memorize, but then have an understanding so that you can derive what this is. So memorize this. And then kindly take note na LIFO is not generally accepted. So all 3 are pwede except LIFO. Things in terms of theory for cost flow assumptions. I'd repeat this 3 more times to emphasize how important this is. But I'll trust na you'll just make sure na you know all the highlighted ones in the PowerPoint. So number 1, there is no accounting requirement that cost flow be consistent with physical movement of goods. And that number 2, regardless of cost flow, physical count is always required. Right? So regardless of cost flow, physical count is always required. Number 2, consistency principle, important that you understand. So once you choose your cost flow assumption, you have to be consistent. Na yun yung method na gagawin mo year in, year out. If you're gonna change from FIFO to WAVE, you have to disclose it under consistency principle. In terms of the cost flow, sa specific identification, it will give you the same results in terms of, it will give you the same COGS, it will give you the same ending inventory. For FIFO, same results. For perpetual and periodic. For LIFO, different. For WAVE, different. Valuation. Please memorize NRV. NRV, pinaka-important. NRV. Estimated selling price minus estimated cost of completion minus estimated cost to sell. I promise you, maraming terms na ibabato sa inyo para lintuhin kayo how to solve for NRV. Strictly follow the definitions. Okay? So, kwari ito, kay Libby, I added this extra thing. Estimated profit margin as percentage of sale. Ngayon, magugulat kayo. Parang, shucks, paano na ito i-solve? I don't know how to solve for this. Pampagulo lang siya. You strictly follow the definition of NRV, which is estimated selling price minus estimated to cost to sell minus estimated cost to complete. So ignore cost to replace, ignore estimated profit margin as blah, blah, blah. Get your NRV, then you compare which one's lower. If I ask you, what is the valuation of inventory 1? The correct answer would be, you compare 60 and 90, so 60 to. What is the correct inventory of number 2? 70, 50, 70. And then what is the correct total ending inventory? 250. So again, make sure na you know what's being asked. I can ask on a per product basis. So, what is the inventory of product 1? 60. Product 3, 50. Pero if I ask you, what is the total ending inventory? You add all 3 products, right? All 4 products, right? So, I will leave it up to you to just read kung ano yung inventoriable and outright expense. Pero I want to highlight one thing. Trade discounts are not purchase discounts. Trade discounts are not purchase discounts. They are outright used to get invoice price from the list price. So, I have 1,000 and I have a trade discount of 10% and a 1% cash discount. What that means is that from my list price of 1,000, I subtract 10% to get my invoice price of 900. And then I subtract 1% to get what I need to pay. Okay? So, trade discounts are not purchase discounts. Trade discounts are outright expense. Trade discounts are not inventoriable. So, purchase discounts are inventoriable, but trade discounts are not. Okay? So, kindly take note. Next, inventory errors. Sobrang daming items on inventory errors. So please, 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 master inventory errors. I already summarized all of the effects kapag yung beginning inventory understated or overstated, ending inventory understated, overstated. Kindly take note that it assumes no errors from previous period. So, huwag kayong malito. Bibigyan kayo ng 3 years. And then sasabihin nila, year 1, year 2, wala namang problema si ending inventory. So, sa year 3, you just follow the simple table. Now, kailan magkaka-complication? Kindly take note na if your ending inventory error happened in a previous period or in the current period tapos may next period pa, kindly take note that that error would continue to the next period. And ultimately, I will repeat this 3 times again. Remember that error in ending inventory in current period will correct itself next period. Meaning, yung ending inventory mo understated before, pero magko-correct siya itself for some reason if you follow the flow. Here, ending inventory is overstated, but it will correct itself. So again, error in ending inventory in current period will correct itself in the next period, right? So please practice inventory errors. If you want to score high in short problems, and then hindi kayo confident na magaling kayo mag-interpret ng T accounts, I suggest you master inventory. Inventory inclusions, inventory errors, cost flow. Yun yung pampataas ng grades nyo. Right? Yung short probs sa chapters 1 to 4, I hope you master what I discussed kanina. And then by using the insights na I was able to share, I think you'll be able to do well on the exam. Right? So please practice your inventory errors. Next, sa estimation method, please know the 2 valuation methods. Yung gross profit rate, please master this. Sayang yung short probs. I can assure you sa inventory, puro short probs to. And again, like what I mentioned, short probs is what? Short probs is 2 points each, right? So, kung kinakabahan kayo sa short probs, sasabihin ko na sa inyo, maraming short problems sa inventory. Half of the short problems sa inventory, right? So, galingan nyo sa short probs sa inventory so that ma-pull up nyo yung grades, right? So actually, that finally ends our midterm review number 1. So again, I'm not sure if I'll have the voice pa tomorrow to discuss more exercises. But I can assure you na what I discussed today, all of the theory na questions, if you really listen attentively, you'll get a perfect. So short probs, I gave you all the insights you'll need to be able to answer all chapters 1 to chapters 4. Sa inventory, I'll leave it up to you. I'll try tomorrow morning to upload if I have a voice and my cough gets better. But I'm not sure if I'll be able to, right? So my last portion for today is I will discuss the quiz 5. So I'll leave it up to the people who are attending now to please cascade to everyone. There are 3 things na I'll be leaving to the class. One would be the recording today. Second would be the Excel file for quiz 5 solutions. And then third would be the PowerPoint, right? So that you can review. So quiz 5, on average, we finally, I feel, are on the right track. I know na probably burat na kayo sa 99.1. Because again, I feel like the questions are challenging. But the good thing is, we're on an uptrend. The class average is 20 out of 30, which is 66%, which is way, way better than quiz 3 and quiz 4. And in terms of our class, the batch average is around 18, if I am correct, right? So now, I will just discuss the correct answers for each of the theory and the short probs. So, as you can see, as much as possible, we don't want naman people to fail. So, dinamihan na namin yung time. And then, I feel like the questions are easier now. So, please, tough it out. I believe in everyone. I super love everyone in the class. And I want all of your efforts to be rewarded. So, tiwala on my end, I'll do my best to really support and guide you to really get a good grade in 99.1. But give and take. Please, cascade to your classmates na, yun, parang, for me, the make or break for the midterms would be if you really, watch this reviewer and you answer your quizzes or exercises for chapter 3 and chapter 6. Right? Aside from all of your quizzes. Okay. So, cost flow assumptions. Blank requires companies keep record of original cost. So, ito, since it's each individual inventory item, it's specific identification. Inventory errors. Oh, here, overstated ending inventory in period 1. So, ending inventory period 1 will mean what? Overstated equity balance. Equity is overstated. And overstated is ending inventory, overstated is equity. So if you memorize this table, this is easy. Please memorize this table or please understand how it works. Ang daming points under inventory errors. Yun. For inventory turnover, this is just definition. Only statement 2 is true. So this is the correct way to compute for inventory and turnover. Inventory turnover does not measure the average number of days. That is days to sell, not inventory turnover. So this is false. Kaya statement 2 is true. Which of the following is true about determining inventory quantities? So goods sold in transit under FOB shipping point are recognized in buyer's financial statement. So right? So pag FOB shipping point, buyer will be the ones to include. Trade discounts are not part of inventory cost, right? So please, trade discounts are not the same as purchase discounts. Next, inventory inclusion. Ito lang yung mahirap sa multiple choice. Ang gagawin nyo lang is you come up with the table. You start off with, ano ba yung inventory balance niya? 1.9 million. Right? Ito. And then under each number, you ask yourself, should I include or not include? Si purchase na destination point, not include. Since you're a consignee, you don't include. If you're a sale in destination point, yes, you include. And if you're a consigner, yes, you include. So the first test here is, alam nyo ba what to include or what to exclude? Kasi lahat naman to not included. So, yun. So, ang i-include ko lang is yung SDP or sale destination point and when you're a consigner. The next trick here is, please be careful, ang binigay sales price. So, wag kayong malito, markup on cost. So, now that we know the gross profit method, what is the markup on cost? 50% markup on cost. So, here. Means na yung 100% mo is yung cost of goods sold. And therefore, your net sales is 150% and your gross profit is 50%. And pag markup on cost, what you want to do is divide your sales price by the sales ratio to get your cost of goods sold. So applying that here, ang binigay sa atin is yung sales price ni number 3 and ni number 4. I know that since it's markup on cost, my cost is 100% and my sales price is 130%. Therefore, my sales ratio is 130%. Therefore, 23,400, the sales price divided by 133% is the cost of number 3. So 18,000 yung cost ng inventory mo. And then yung 36,400, you divide by 130% to get 28. So my correct ending inventory is 1.9 million plus 18,000 plus 28,000 is equal to 1.993800. 1,993,800. Right? So ito yung tama. Number 7, ano yung incorrect? Sale of consigned goods is recognized by consignee. Yung consignee will not recognize a revenue for the sale of consigned goods. Okay? Because hindi sila yung may. So that ends theory. Next, si COVAX. This is just an LCNRV problem. And this proves my point. Sa LCNRV, ang tinetest lang is gaano nyo ba kaalam yung definition. So first, yung purchase price and yung freight cost will be the one that will comprise of your cost. So 223. Yung NRV, it's selling price minus cost to distribute minus cost to complete. Hindi replacement cost. So ignore the replacement cost. So just add 305 plus 183. 305 plus 83. So you have the cost of 223. Sorry. 305 minus 83. So you have the cost of 223 and NRV. So you have to value your inventory at the lower. Sino mas mababa? Si cost or si NRV? Si NRV. So Pfizer, 222,000. Si Sputnik, you apply the same thing. So you add purchase price and freight cost to get cost. And then estimated selling price minus estimated cost to distribute minus estimated cost to complete, 184. Sino mas mababa? Si cost of 188 or si 184? Si NRV, 184. Therefore, ang tinanong, what is the total inventory? It's 222 plus 184. 406,000. So, ang tamang sagot is 222,406. Next, si Asa Company. Retail inventory method. How do you solve for retail inventory? Make a table. Cost, retail. Next, fill out your cost flow. Beginning inventory plus purchases will give your COGAS. COGAS, you'll have your sales, SRA, and ending inventory at retail. The first thing that you do is create or solve for your COGAS. How do you get your COGAS? My COGAS at cost is beginning inventory plus purchases. My COGAS at retail is inventory plus purchases. Step 2, and then subtract your sales, add back your SRA to get your ending inventory. So basically, this is just 553 minus 4533. So basically, just sum the COGAS, subtract mo yung sales, add back SRA, you'll get 1,009,700. Step 2, get the cost ratio. COGAS at cost of 213 and 5,533. Divide mo. You get your cost ratio. Now that you have your cost ratio, now that you have your ending inventory at retail, it's so easy to get your ending inventory at cost. Ending inventory at retail of 109 times cost ratio is 403,880. Right? Last, agawin. Si agawin is inventory errors. And sa inventory errors, determine the error. May tatlong separate scenarios. Scenario 1, your ending inventory of current period in 2021 is overstated raw. It's asking you your asset balance. Is it overstated, understated? We look at the table. Ending inventory is overstated. My asset is overstated. So my ending inventory is overstated. My asset is overstated. 12,100. Next. Ang error mo raw is that your purchases of 2022 is understated at 32,000. So therefore, in order to correct this, we have to add 32,000. But what they're asking is, what is your correct net income? So how do you do that? What is your correct cost of goods sold? So how do we do that? You get the recorded beginning inventory of 53,000. Ito yung recorded purchases, but we know it's understated. So we add 32,000 to increase that understatement to get our correct COGAS of 755,100. Less your ending inventory of 55,000, which will give you a cost of goods sold of 700,100. 700,100, yeah. And then finally, ito, beginning inventory 2021 is understated. So you just look at this. Beginning inventory is understated. How does it affect net income? Net income is overstated by 5.8. So how do you adjust net income? If my net income is 124,500, this is my recorded net income, and it's overstated, to get the correct balance, I'll subtract 5,800 to get my corrected NI of 118,700. So for this, yung last is yung cost flow. I will just share the way to solve for it. But again, just watch the lecture sa cost flow to understand. I think that a lot of the class got it naman. Pero please, kung hindi nyo nakuha to sa exam, please review yung cost flow. Yun. So, thank you so much, Anna, Ross, Jor, Sky, Marco, and Isabel for staying. I know, sobrang tagal na 3 hours. But I hope marami kayong natutunan. I really appreciate that you stayed. And I hope you were able to maintain your concentration. Again, everything na I discussed na theory, it's somewhere there in the discussion that we had. The short problems, the clues to able to solve them in chapters 1 to 4 is somewhere here in what I highlighted. So please take note of all the exercises I highlighted. Do them again. Do it by yourself. I think that's my suggestion. And then, yun. Focus on chapter 3, chapter 6. Yeah. I think that ends everything. Are there any questions? from the class. But thank you so much for staying. I know it's a Saturday. But I hope na, yeah, go Russ. Go ahead.
Sir, pina-ask lang. Yung sa moving average po ba, we estimate during the process or sa final answer lang po?
Okay. Okay. That's a good question. So, before or sa quiz, magkakaroon kasi ng rounding errors, right? Na parang pag inestimate mo, magkakaroon ng parang hindi tama, right? Like, hindi siya exact to the... Am I getting the question right, Ross? Na parang sa moving average, when you divide it, hindi siya malinis na number. It's gonna be like point blank, 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 blank. So, you don't know when to round, right? That's the question.
Yes po.
Yeah. So, I will use... Let's go back here. For everyone that had a mistake during the moving average, I have a question. Can you guys see the quiz sa UVLE or not? Hindi nyo pa nakikita yung grades nyo?
Hindi po, sir.
Okay. So, that's okay. Don't worry. I will make sure na after the exam, I will release the grades. For me, I understand na you might be apprehensive because of quiz 3, 4, and 5. But as long as you're within the batch average, you don't have to worry. Kasi I think one of the things that we were exploring was, I think it was quiz 4, we might change a lot in quiz 4. I can't assure it to you yet, pero kapit lang. Like, for me, as long as you're within the batch average, you're in a good place. Mas importante is midterms. Sorry, I got distracted. But yun, the reason I was saying that was that for the people na ang mistake lang nila was because nagka-rounding average sa quiz 5, please email me once I release the grades. Na, sir, or sir, ang mistake ko lang is yung moving average ko. Ni-round off ko lang ng mali. I will accept those. So I'll be lenient with that. But for the exam, so ganito kasi yung moving average, right? So dito tayo magkakatalo. Now, I want, for safety, use 4 decimal places. So, what do I mean by that? Sorry. Diba 4,650? So I'm looking at this. So let's say, alam ko yung 4,650, alam ko yung 250. So 4,650 divided by 250 units. 18.6. So yan, wala tayong problema. 18.6. Let's look at this one. Yung next. 3,846 divided by 185. Okay, dito tayo magkakaproblema. Where do you round, right? Ideally, para hindi masyadong iba yung answer nyo, round to the 4th decimal place. So, ito 20.79, right? This one I haven't consulted pa with the department, pero my knee-jerk reaction is, para sure, 4 decimal. 20.7892. Kasi 8 to, diba? So, 20.7892. So, 20.7892. And then, so, ito yun, diba? And then, yun. So, ito yung multiply nyo na as a moving average unit. So, 4 decimal places. Was I able to answer your question, Ross?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So, yun lang naman. Yun. Are there any other questions from the rest of the class? Go lang. Sorry, I ate up a lot of time. But if we're gonna stay here for the next hour kasi may rami pa kayong questions, I wouldn't mind. So, wag kayo mahiya. Go, baton nyo lang. If you have any other questions. Be it chapter 5, chapter 6, anything. If there are none, kindly thumbs up and so that we can formally end the recording. Yeah. Okay, I think Anna's okay. Yeah. Okay, thank you so much, everyone. So I really appreciate yun. And then please kindly cascade to the rest of your classmates. I understand actually, I didn't expect anyone to attend kasi mahaba. But sobrang, I feel like if you only had one day to study, this is what I do. I would study by myself until parang 11 a.m. tomorrow. And then I will just review this midterm review. And then from this midterm review, be honest with yourself. Ano ba yung kinakatakutan yung chapter? Kung kinakatakutan yung chapter is chapter 6, I'll just do all the exercises again in chapter 6. If it's chapter 3, I'll do again chapter 3. And then, get a good night's rest. And then last pala, tama ba na si Clarence is your batcher? Is that correct?
Yes po, 1 po siya sa mga batch rep namin.
Okay. So, I'll just ask Clarence. Pero, to end everything on a happy note, as I promised, since everyone's been so participative, we'll have pizza at the end. So, I'll just ask help from Clarence kung anong pizza yung gusto niyo. So, syempre, alam ko mamamatay kayo. I mean, mamamatay lahat sa quiz. Pero, at least you'll have pizza afterwards. Yun. And then, huwag kayong kabahan. Just make sure na you're well rested. And then, regardless of the outcome of midterm, syempre, try to score as much as possible. Pero, parang the SEM is just one half. So, if ever parang pangit talaga yung first half, knock on wood, kaya pa yung bahiwiin sa second half. Pero syempre, mag-ipon na tayo sa midterms yan. So thank you so much, everyone. Have a great night. And I hope you were able to also have dinner. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you po, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Goodbye and